Meeting of the Cambria Community Service. If you would please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. I think we do have a super duper quorum. We've got both the Finance Committee and the Infrastructure Committee here, as well as all 5 board members. I would like to do introductions. Going around again, I just want to repeat, if you would please silence your electronic devices so they don't interrupt us. And we will start with Director Wharton, who I'm going to introduce because he doesn't have a microphone right now. Welcome, Director Wharton, and then we'll come around this way. Go ahead, Karen. Oh, you got to turn on your mic.
Karen Dean.
Harry Farmer.
Just say it loud.
Okay, Karen Dean, would introduce yourself again as the Vice Chair.
Karen Dean, Vice Chair of the Infrastructure Committee.
Yeah, okay.
Karen Dean, Vice Chair of the Infrastructure Committee.
Harry Farmer, I just happen to be here. There you are.
And I'm Jim Beringer. I'm the Chair of the Infrastructure Committee.
Merle Kluft. Mike Lyons.
I am the Vice Chair of the Finance Committee.
I'm Dwayne Lee, representing the citizens of Cambria on the Finance Committee.
Cindy Stidell, Finance Committee.
Ted Sigler, Finance Committee. Dave Pearson, Chairman of the Finance Committee.
Before I turn it over to the Finance and Infrastructure Chair people, I just want to let people know we are going to run this much more like a committee meeting, which means that if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand or come up to the lectern. It's important that you are speaking into a microphone because this is being recorded. So if we can't hear you, neither can the people at home. So if you do have a question at some point, you can raise your hand. I do have 2 requests to speak at this point. And I'm going to take those 2. If you want to fill out a speaker slip, you can go ahead and do that and give it to Ms. Madrid. Otherwise, we will just take raised hands and coming to the lectern because this is not really a formal board meeting. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? Mr. Gruber. Okay, so the general manager just said there's some refreshments over here on the side, and around noontime we'll take a break for lunch.
And then also we have 3 boards over here. This is the CIP boards that we've been talking about.
Oh, okay, so they're great. There's 3 giant boards.
You have the wastewater CIP, you have the water CIP, and then you have the sustainable water facility CIP.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to have these 2 comments, and then I'm going to turn it over to the Finance Committee Chair. Crosby Swartz, followed by Tina Dickinson.
I just wanted to, there we go. This is just a reminder of 2 items that came up before that haven't totally been answered. One of the big problems facing the district right now is how to recover the costs of hauling and disposing of the waste when they're operating the SWF. They're proposing to eliminate the SWF operating surcharge, which really eliminates your your opportunity to recover the operating costs. They're quite substantial. So I think you need to answer the basic question, where are you going to get the money for the hauling and disposal if you have to operate this plant full time, for example, in maybe November and December? Remember, if you get to the end of the year and there's no rain in the forecast, you're going to have to turn this thing on and run it, and not just part-time either. Running it as proposed, part-time would generate about 29, if it operates according to specs, would generate around 29 acre-feet per month, and you're going to be using around 40 acre-feet per month. So the well levels are still going to be going down, and you may need to operate it at full capacity. It's just something that needs to be discussed. And I would certainly recommend keeping the SWF operating surcharge, because otherwise you're either going to be charging for something that you're not delivering, or you're going to be recovering an inadequate amount of money. The other item, it's one of the capital improvement items, is the surface water treatment plant. There's been no real justification of when we would need to operate that, or why the cost is justified at this time, and I think that's something that you need to discuss as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Tina Dickinson.
Good morning, committee members and members of the board. Tina Dickinson, Cambria. I'm a little bit confused about the agenda. It says public comment on agenda items. So when does the public get to comment on anything other than at this number 2 today?
So
Could you please tell me?
Yes. Whenever you raise your hand and are recognized by whichever chair is running the meeting at the time being, because we're running it as a less formal meeting. So whenever the item arises that you would like to speak about, you should raise your hand or approach the lectern.
Okay, so that it should have just been like an ordinary meeting where we get to speak on agenda items then. It's kind of strange. Nobody knew that. Can you hear me?
Less formal. I think we can.
Okay. All right. So I don't intend to stay for what may be a very long meeting, but I have noticed something, and it was at June 21st, a June 21st meeting. I was present. Alex Handler was here. He gave a third presentation, PowerPoint presentation on the rate study increase and analysis. I was standing at the back, and Alex got up, and Mr. Gruber had just given a budget review. It was this. It was a packet, and I had already looked at it, and he came toward the door, and I said, Mr. Handler, why did you not include the $733,000 in the SWF reserve fund? And he said, because I was not informed about it. And I said, really? And I thought he was going to use the bathroom, but what he did was he went to the foyer table where all the document papers are, and he picked up what was the last copy of one of these. In looking at page 40 of the on the agenda today, page 40, table 5, SWF financial projections. I have a question as to why for 2017-18, the revenues are zero. We should have $733,000 minus the $23,000 that General Manager Gruber said on the June 28th board meeting he used to spend to purchase a truck for this new employee for the COP. So why do we have a zero beginning balance for SWF fund reserves? There should be $710,000 approximately in that column. The other item I wrote to the board this morning, because we have so little notice on these meetings, special meetings, 24 hours noticing, is that, well, I think you've answered that question, President Rice, because I didn't think we were able to speak other than at this item number 2. I am I am going to say that if this $710,000 is not included in Mr. Handler's analysis and a rate of the rate study and proposed rate increases, then I would say that the rate study and the proposed rate increases are null and void, because that is almost $750,000 missing from the analysis and for the proposed rate increases that you're going to be bringing about tomorrow. That's a serious issue, and I think the Finance Committee, I don't know if they're even aware of it, but I hope they are, and I'm bringing it to their attention and everyone's attention. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and I think that we will at some point address that question. Is there any other questions or comments before we begin, before I toss it to our Finance Committee Chair? I also want to make a correction. I misspoke. Ted Ziegler is, of course, the Vice Chair of the Committee for Finance. I'm sorry about that, Ted. I went from president to nada, and all of a sudden I got confused. Sorry. AGP, did you have that wireless mic still? Maybe we can get it to the general manager so that he's got a... Thank you. Yeah, just hold down the button. That's all right. I just want to make sure people can hear you. Thank you, AGP.
Just really quickly on the set-aside funds, the $710,000, which is probably less than that right now. That was set aside money for future mitigation related to the sustainable water facility. The rates that Alex came up with are derived or from operational and capital cost. So from a policy standpoint, that set aside money is still a set aside money for future mitigation, whatever that may be defined as from a policy perspective of the board. For an example, do we anticipate future litigation as we move forward with the regular coastal development permit? And so I've asked the board at some point in time, and Ms. Dickinson's right about the truck, that should come out of there. I've asked the board at some point in time to redefine that money that we have remaining from that original $1 million. As you know, we've incurred a lot of costs associated with the cease and desist order and the closure plan and things like that. To incorporate that money would be inconsistent with what the board has previously deemed that money to be designated for. Now, again, I think that money needs to be more better defined as far as mitigation. What does that mean? Because when we do have a cost that exceeds our available revenues for the sustainable water facility, we've had no other point of funds to go to other than that fund. But I hope that answers the question.
Sure, go right ahead.
Hello.
$710,000 is a lot of money when you are looking at a rate increase of about 100%. That money should not be hidden. That money should absolutely be in the reporting of what monies the district has. Buying a truck from that was not mitigation. Buying a truck is absolutely should have come from somewhere else. And so to say that this money was put aside for mitigation purposes, we read what the money has been used for. That money should not be hidden from what we have been given here to look at as far as a budget and as far as rate increases going forward. You cannot hide $710,000. It absolutely should be on this page for the amount that it was $733 last month, and then you said, General Manager Gruber, you spent $23,000 on a truck from that fund. Now you're saying it's even less than that. So I'd like to know how much less and what else you spent the money on. That absolutely should be here. You can't hide it. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to open the meeting, and we're now on item 3A. Finance Committee leads discussion on process and policies to set in place for the implementation of the capital improvement program. And we'll get to that discussion here shortly. I just wanted to open with some clarity on exactly what we hope to accomplish and some of the background as to why we're where we're at. The CCSD has 4 very separate funds that we use to provide the necessary services to the community. The water, SWF, and wastewater funds are separate enterprise funds, right? And we have a 4th fund, which is the general or government fund. The water revenues go directly into the water enterprise fund and cannot be used for any other purpose other than the expenses of that water system. We can't use them on the wastewater system. We can't use them on the fire department. We can't use them on anything else. Those revenues go into the water fund and are used for the water fund. For those, the revenue that we receive, which about 85% of the revenue that the water department gets is from the rates, and the other 15% is from the standby fees and other fees that they charge, okay? The SWF is a separate fund. The operating money that comes in from the charges on the rates goes into the operating and allows us to operate and do the testing that we've been having to do, have the personnel on board to do that and to maintain the thing. So that's what that money goes for. It can't go for anything else. Wastewater, same thing. Wastewater rates pay for about 95%, okay, and the standby fees are about the other 5% of the total monies that we have to spend on the wastewater system, both repairs, maintenance, and upgrades. That's where it comes from. In the last few years, the monies collected for the wastewater and water funds in particular have been insufficient to cover basic maintenance and repairs of these systems. Okay, we've been deferring maintenance, we've been putting off repairs, we've been behind on both of those, and it's because we just haven't had enough money from the rates in order to do the work that we need to get done. In addition, the wastewater fund took about $466,000 loan from the general fund in order to meet its commitments in the fiscal year 15-16 or 16-17. Okay, and again, the water fund had a loan taken out of $157,000, and both of those loans are due to be paid back to the general fund. That's the way it's supposed to operate. Okay, so they're already behind what they need to do. Additionally, the wastewater maintenance and repair budget for this year is about $100,000 short on maintenance and repair monies. Okay, we did that so that it would be a balanced budget, but I think when we get to the permanent budget, which we have to approve prior to September 1st, I think we need to address that and probably put in there a provision that we'll have to get another loan from the general fund of $100,000 in order to meet the obligations for maintenance and the bare maintenance and repairs that we've been putting into that system. We also have a policy that calls for reserve funds, okay? And it's a recommended, the policy recommends a certain amount of money that we keep in reserve in order to meet emergency situations, to do working capital, or if we run over a little bit on the budget, we can take money from there instead of taking a loan from the general fund. All right, the water fund is in pretty good shape. It's got $1 million plus in the reserve, okay? The wastewater fund has zero money, none, okay? The SWF, okay, has zero monies. Now, the contingency money that we set aside as a board to save that money, and that was over $1 million that was set aside when we got the loan, all right, just to make sure that we had enough money to do all the mitigation things that we need to do in order to meet the county's requirements to get the permanent permit and also the Coastal Commission's requirements. We're already going to hire, we've hired Miss Cleveland to do an additional work out there, okay, that has been requested of us by the county, and that is coming out of that $700,000 that we've got left, okay? That's going to come out this year. And I think it's prudent of us to leave that money aside to make sure that we've got monies to do that. At that time, when we've got the permanent permit and we're moving along, I think that would be the time to take whatever is left, if there's anything left, and put that into a reserve fund. But again, that stays in the SWF enterprise fund. It cannot be transferred to the water fund or the wastewater fund or any other fund. All right? So just some an idea as to where we stand today, okay? So what we want to do here first is we want to talk about what policies we need to review or we need to put in place, prior to starting to work on the CIP. And we'll start to work on that as soon as we get the rates increased and we get some money built up, which is probably going to be the second half of this coming fiscal year. So we put in the packet two different pieces of information. One is kind of an asset management description on how to do a CIP and that kind of thing, and that was given to us by Mr. Paul Reichart. We thank him for that. I don't see him here today. And then Cindy Stidell was nice enough to give us a description of what she thought might be a good idea as to what to do as far as laying out the different projects and stuff. And I thought that was a good start. So discussion by the Finance Committee, and if you have questions, again, put up your hand. If you want to make a statement or comment, also just put up your hand and we'll get you up to the microphone. Ted, you want to lead us off?
The information about capital improvement plan and specific steps to be taken to track it, I think is just good basic financial management. We have a lot of projects in front of us. You can see from the boards over here, and each one of those has both sort of a physical definition and also leads to an outcome, and that outcome is something that's necessary for the provision of services to the community. So making sure that we have a good track on what is the project, why are we doing it, how much are we spending, and when is it complete, just makes good financial sense. And then going further into the policies that Cindy had outlined for us here, I think that just builds on the same kind of philosophy of financial management. Our objective, my objective as a member of the Finance Committee, one of my objectives, is to make sure that what the CCSD does is transparent to the community. Why is it necessary to be transparent? Because we are the community. We are the ratepayers. We are on the government side, the taxpayers, and we are the people that employ others to do the service of providing us water and wastewater. So it's necessary for each one of us to be able to understand what it is that we are doing for ourselves. I think the one thing that I would add to the pages, let's call it pages 6 through 9, is to deal with things that we don't know about today, but which will come up. It's inevitable that something is going to come up that we haven't foreseen, a need for capital, and it's really nice to think that Bob Gressens has a perfect crystal ball and knows what's going to be necessary over the next year, 3 years, 5 years. But I'm, I guess, enough of a pessimist to think that even Mr. Gressens may not have captured everything, and so when rates are being set, I think they're set on what we expect, but there will be unexpected things, and we should be able to account for those as well.
Thank you. Cindy?
What I'll talk to mostly is just the information that was outlined in pages 8 and 9. I will reinforce the ideas also that Ted had mentioned in terms of the involvement with community and the need for establishing and executing strong. The need for establishing. Is this better? Okay. Establishing and executing strong financial policies. My intent when I put together the recommendations was based on history of what I had in terms of business involvements, and the idea that normally there is traceability and understanding why something came to its point. And oftentimes you end up with projects that are more than something that happens in a 30, 60, 90-day period. Projects and things that you need to do for viability happen over time, and they may happen over years. The ability to judge the things that need to happen and make your choices in the way that you implement them have to do with how they interact with one another, what their potential risk and priority is to the community. All of those things are, in my mind, extremely important to be able to have visibility to. This just happens to be, there certainly can be another process that someone else may come up with. This was just something that I put out there on the basis of experiences that I had. But I think the definition of something up front and being able to document its potential risk if it isn't done is paramount, because that's what helps you in your decision-making process. And as you go through that process, to make sure then if you are incorporating that to your budget, you establish the linkages within your financial systems so that you have segregated traceability of the things that are being executed. In terms of a historic document, it will give you reference to the costs that were associated with something. It'll give you a bit of a historic view for future planning where you may not have considered something specifically when you launched into a process to put in place, or a project to put in place. That will give you additional information down the line the next time you have to go a certain direction. It'll possibly provide you with the nuances you may not have had before. I think also that historically, by establishing, for instance, the listing with the CIP lists that we have out here, if you formulate that in the terms of a document defining what it is and its risks, even though you may be making a choice not to do it at the time, it's going to provide you with some history. It's going to provide you with something to go back to immediately the next time that you have to launch through your process. Things may have changed with those individually over time, but at least will give you a touchstone to go back to, so you're not continually reinventing the wheel. And you're not continually having to rely on one or two or three people to give you visibility into something. You have a documentation path, and you have the access to the incurrence of cost. And that was my intent with this.
And I think it was a great attempt. Thank you very much for putting that together for us. Dwayne, any comments?
I think what Cindy laid out is just good financial sense, and this is something that we need to be following, to the T. And the problem I think that we had with the last rate increase, looking at it from just a citizen, and looking at what happened to the money, and what we had basically a list of capital improvements that needed to be exercised at that time, and looking at what was accomplished as far as the capital expenditures. There was some done. We know that. There wasn't quite probably as many done as what we thought would happen with that rate increase. So I think clarification as to where we want to go with the money, what we're going to do with the money, and everything should be crystal clear. And I think as long as the general public or the ratepayers can see this, then they can see, that this money is being spent where it was supposed to be. I wish we'd had more time on this. This is just about our third or fourth meeting. The first two meetings were more or less organizational, and the last meeting that we had was to go through the budget pretty much line by line, which we did, and a 2-hour allocation per meeting certainly wasn't sufficient, and approximately 5 hours later we finished. But we did get through with the budget process, but didn't even get to the rate study. So, I hate to do anything that is of such importance in such a hurried manner, because I think that everything needs to be looked at and studied, and then we can make a lot better decisions, I think. So I hate to see us put in any type of emergency situation or a rush situation where we don't do the proper investigations, get the questions answered that we might have, and so on. So I wish that we'd had a little more time on this. I think there's a lot of areas within the current spending that needs to be looked at. I think in the financial situation that we're in now, I think a austerity program as to spending anything outside the budget should be implemented. I don't think that it's quite fair to put on the shoulders of the general manager the responsibility that, he can spend, up to $25,000 that wasn't in the budget without board approval. I think the board needs to approve that. I think the board needs to come back in and step in and say, we need to look at this, rather than putting it on the shoulders of one person. Those are going to come up. We know that. We know we're going to have expenditures that we hadn't planned on, that's not in the budget. And hopefully, as time progresses and these reserve funds are built up, this will cushion that. And then we might be able to go back to a situation to where, we can ease some of this up. But I think, as for right now, in looking at what we need to ask the public to come up with as far as rate increases, I think we should all be cutting back somewhat. I look at the expenses every month on the agenda, And it seems like the credit card expenses have just exploded. And that was set up primarily in the beginning to help staff and so on in travel. So it was set up to be, something that would help them in their travel. So, I would like to look at that more in depth. I think the staff did a tremendous job in looking at the needs from each department. And Jerry was telling us they went to the different department heads and got a want list that had in priority 1 through 4 what needs to be done in that department. And that's what we looked at whenever we were looking at setting up this budget. I know they spent an awful lot of time doing that, but I also think that we need to spend more time in looking at how we spend our money. And I really think that needs to come back more to the board of directors. And as a committee, as a standing citizens committee, my understanding of what we need to be doing is to come up with solutions and helpful comments and procedures that we can say to the board of directors, we recommend that you do this. It's just a recommendation from us. Then it's up to them to implement that. But I really think that we've got a lot of areas in where we're currently spending that can be looked at. And I know this is not the time, and I don't want to go into it now, the specific areas, but there are quite a few, and we could have discussion on that. Like I say, we just didn't have time to have enough discussion on a lot of this, in my opinion. So I wish we had.
All right, thank you, Dwayne. Amanda? Oh, we have a couple of questions. Start with you.
Do I have to push something here? Just talk. I completely support what you just said, Mr. Lee. The fact that the board is now in a position where they have to come up with a budget by the 1st of September without having all the information necessary to find out where the district can, as you say, act with some austerity is surprising to me. And if it were me, I would suggest not increasing the budget until this information has been identified. And if we don't have the money for trucks and other fancy projects that we can't afford, then we don't spend that money. But I support completely what you just said. So thank you for saying it. It's the first time I've heard it. Thanks.
Thank you, Tina.
Thank you to the Finance Committee for each of your comments and thoughts. And especially, Mr. Lee, I couldn't agree with you more, because what really troubled me was to see these two agendas one day apart, where the public and most people aren't even aware of these meetings, that we are to comprehend something as gigantic as the budget and a gigantic rate increase. It doesn't seem fair. It seems that more thought needs to go into it. And as some of you mentioned, I mean, you've only had, 3-4 meetings? The first one was to just get initiated and whatever. I've only attended one of them. And I don't understand the same mindset that has been within this district ever since I started paying attention 11 years ago. And that is the constant rush to judgment. We cannot keep rushing through and saying that we don't want to kick this can down the road. Well, guess what? It's by not kicking the can down the road is what's got us into the mess we're in. So we're in this gigantic mess, and now we have 2 established standing committees to try to sort some things out that we are paying plenty for management to be doing. and it is not happening. And it is getting worse and worse and worse. And when I went through the agenda packet, the expenditures prior to the June 28th meeting, which I could not attend, I was appalled at what I saw. In fact, I couldn't even get through the whole thing. It was astounding to see how our money, the ratepayers of Cambria, is being spent. And it needs to be curbed. And I think the board really needs to take a serious look at what the root of the cause is. The symptoms are one thing, but what's the root of the cause? And it's quite clear to me what the root of the cause is, and it needs to be dealt with. Thank you.
Come on up. Good, how are you?
My comments are very brief.
Excuse me,
You didn't tell us anything we don't know.
Could we get the names of the people? I mean, Dennis Perry got up earlier, and he didn't give his name, and Cheryl's up now. Just for the public out there that are watching to know who's speaking.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, Harry. Yeah, just say your name.
Cheryl
for us, please.
McDowell. You didn't tell us anything we don't know. And where has our money gone? Okay, where has our money gone over the last increase? You didn't address freezing salaries, and you didn't address work comp and all the necessary things that are involved with salaries and the staff. And from social media, we will have a successful 218. So you should have a different plan.
Thank you. Amanda?
I would like to thank the chair of the committee for working with the chair of the infrastructure committee to put this together, and I appreciate that we're having a discussion about the policies that we may need to put into place to help the community feel more confident that we are doing the right thing. I especially appreciated the specific steps in creating this is on page 7, the specific steps for doing capital improvement planning, and the thoughts that Cindy put into the notes that are here from her. I think that this district has a long history of putting the cart before the horse, very long history of it, and I think that at some point you have to put your foot down and say, okay, it's time to stop doing that. We've got a big list of projects we need to do, but we don't even have an asset inventory of what we've got and what shape it's in. I think without getting an idea of the lay of the land, what is it that we're really looking at? And the issues of what's the risk if we don't do this project? What are the benefits for spending the money on a specific project? They need to be clearly laid out, I think, for the community to feel comfortable with the increases that I believe are pretty close to what they need to be based on what I've seen in budgets. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think that there's places where we could be more lean, places where we could be planning better so that we get a better more efficiency from our system and the things that we're doing. But without having, and I'm just going to say that without having some kind of asset management plan, an asset management inventory, we don't even really know which ones of these. I mean, thank goodness Bob's here because he gives, I mean, not just here today, but here at the district, because he's got a history and a knowledge of this district and where the oldest things are that need to be fixed and which things are more closest to needing to be changed from the duct tape fix that it has right now to something more like a replacement. But the board doesn't have a very good handle on what that is. And speaking to not having enough time, as a member of the Water Emergency Alternative Citizens Committee, way back when in 2009, I think, we took almost a year just to get a handle on what's going on with the system so we could understand what options might be available for alternative water supplies in an emergency and what kinds of things would. So I can empathize with the we haven't really had enough time because, and I really appreciate that the members of the Finance Committee have come up to speed as fast as you have, because it is a complex situation we have here. On asset management, I just want to say there's so many benefits to actually having a plan in place, including the trust of the community that things are going right. The board is also able to better know what's happening in terms of making sure our infrastructure is able to provide the services we need to provide. There are difficulties with doing an asset management. It does take time away from actually doing operations. There's barriers like the community would expect to see immediate results. If we pass this rate increase, it's still going to be a while before you see any real tangible results to the money that's being spent, because it's not immediately obvious, especially since most of our assets are underground and or behind fences, gates. There's some short-term upfront costs to doing an asset management inventory that pay off in the long run in savings and sustainability of the system. Without having a good inventory of what it is that we've actually got and what we have to do, it's hard for us to share information with the community, to describe the risks of not maintaining the components, to communicate what the requirements are, to justify the rehabilitation, repair, and replacement of projects, and to justify the long-term financial plan, which means all of which is behind the rates. And if we can't clearly state how the public will know that their money is being spent appropriately, then we haven't put in the policies in place that need to be in place. We have a reserve policy. Is it realistic? No. But we don't even, when we looked at our budget, there's nothing in the budget that says we're setting this amount aside, partially because we're spending it all. But the board could put a policy in place that said, okay, 3% of every dollar that is in your budget for expenditures, you have to set aside that much so that you're not spending every single penny, because that's what's been happening, plus every single penny plus. So I would really like to see us not put the cart before the horse. Timing is everything, and there is a financial gap that's going to cause a problem if we don't go forward on the rates. But it's possible that we could put in some very clear, strict triggers that the board would have to go through certain steps in order to attain the next step up of the increase as part of the rate study and the rate proposal. So it would be something, for example, we could set a policy that says before the second year increase, the board has to have X policies in place, or the staff needs to show progress on asset management program to let us know what's happening. There could be certain triggers that increase doesn't happen unless the board determines that these things have happened. So I think there are solutions that don't put us in a deeper hole and do put more onus on the board to ensure that policies are clear and being implemented as the board desires. Thank you for your attention.
Madam President, may I just make a brief comment? So words are powerful. So when we say we have, quote, no idea what our assets are, that's really not a true statement. We have a fixed asset list that does need to be updated, to be honest with you. It needs to be updated. I support an asset management program of some kind. I think that's a good idea. We have a keep track program at the wastewater treatment plant that has every piece of equipment, the nomenclature of every piece of equipment, belts, hoses, filters, all recorded. We know when the maintenance is due on those. And John's done a really good job on that. That's not a fixed asset necessarily, but we know what we have as far as pieces of equipment, when they were installed, things like that, when the maintenance is due. We'd like to expand that, obviously, to the water department, that Keep Track program, and then to the sustainable water facility. So that's really a sub program of a fixed asset program, because now it allows you to determine when things need to be repaired. A fixed asset program would really be a good idea as we start implementing new pieces of equipment. And I think that's important for the committees and the board to know. Because the fixed asset program, we do need to put all the information into it. I agree with you. But I can tell you one thing, it needs to be replaced. It's at the end of its life. I referenced a staff report that I brought forward to the board when I started with the district in November of 2010. And I was utility manager at that time, February of 2011. And I stood in front of the board after you had a significant sanitary sewer overflow and said, your infrastructure has reached the end of its life. And that wasn't well received, but it was reality in February of 2011. And it's reality now. So in parallel, I support a fixed, some kind of asset management program. Absolutely. But the bottom line is we got old stuff and it needs to be replaced. And we can sugarcoat it and we can talk about it all you want. But the bottom line is we have not been doing what we need to do to replace our infrastructure. It's not rocket scientist stuff. It really isn't. We need money. I've been saying this for 7 years to you guys. We need money. Now, I agree that we need to do a better job in our internal controls about what we're spending. Couldn't agree with you more. It's not an easy decision being an elected official. You guys need to approve these rates, move forward so we can start getting some of these projects done. We haven't sold connections in 17 years. We've lost millions of dollars in potential revenue. Even with these rate increases, we're still the lowest utility company on the coast. And I know it's hard, I know it's difficult, but nobody goes to Dell and says, hey man, you raised a gallon of milk 25 cents, what are you doing to me? Or nobody goes to the Chevron station and says, hey, you just raised my gas 40 cents a gallon, what are you doing to me? Or your phones, your flip phones or your iPhones or whatever you got, or your cable. The cost of doing business all across our society is going up. Medical cost is going up. I know it's a tough decision. I support everything the committees are saying. But the bottom line is we need money. And we need money to get these things done. So, thank you.
Yes,
and Bob wants to add something.
We have made progress. I agree asset management is really important, and we can certainly make sure the Keep Track program is... Oops.
It's on. It's on. Just put it closer to your mouth.
Is it on? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. I think these are great comments. Asset management is important. Besides what Jerry described earlier about the Keep Track program, which needs to be populated more for the other areas beyond wastewater, we did have a lot of work done by Seth Sutherland on our water and sewer mapping, which is a kind of a low-cost viewer program, but we have all the manholes now identified, all the sewer lines identified, all the water lines, water valves in that GIS viewer program, and that's a good start because it takes a while just to get things located and identified. But we can keep going further on that, and as funds allow, as resources, including labor resources, to populate that and make sure that information is kept current. But we do have some good pieces of what you'd call an asset management program. We just need to keep pushing it, and keep populating and keep it up to date. So thank you.
May I just?
Go ahead.
I just want to. I want to recognize there has been a lot of work that has gone on in terms of doing some maintenance that's been deferred, and the board has had to make some decisions that about increasing rates. couple of years ago, and we made some decisions at that time to limit the amount that we were going to raise the sewer rates, because we knew there would be another rate increase going forward. And as part of that board, I acknowledge that was made it the decision easier, because we did need to make sure that we were not going to get even deeper in the hole. I also want to acknowledge the fire hydrants have finally started being maintained, which is a critical part of our infrastructure also that relates to our fire protection services and our water services. And I don't want the fire department to think that they are left out, even though we're doing just infrastructure today. This is all of these things are going to apply across the board. Now, whether or not the past 7 years we've actually accomplished some of the goals on the list, some of the capital projects that have been on the list, included in previous rate studies. I have to say, General Manager Gruber, I understand you're under the limitations you're under. However, this is the district you have to work with. There's been a moratorium for 17 years. There was a moratorium before you got here. There might even be one after you're gone. So I don't think this is something that we can rely on as a place that money will come from. I think there is a lot to be said for working within what your resources and your community allows, and that may be not the most ideal. It might mean you have to have, I don't know, a 1982 car instead of a 2018 car. I mean, it might be a lot of different things that don't need to be replaced, or a lot of things that have been not appropriately allocated across where they should be. As a board member, I take full responsibility for the decisions of the board, whether I agreed with them at the time or not. And I would hope as a general manager that some of the responsibility for whether our capital improvement projects have been implemented or not, whether the maintenance program has been improved or not, is squarely on your shoulders as the general manager, and not to be blaming the community because there's no new accounts and there's no rate increases that have met the needs that your departments and staff would like to have. So, thanks.
Yes. Tina's first, then Mr. Howell, and then Dennis. Back to you. Okay.
In listening to this discussion back and forth, Mr. Gruber has been the manager since 2011, 7 years. Our budget, our revenues have gone up, way up, and yet we find ourselves in a bigger mess than we've ever been in. The board has approved whatever has come out of management and staff, pretty much. While you may say that we need more money, in 2014, the voters of this community, the majority, voted for a $13.4 million loan for a project that's a boondoggle. It's a project that is a total failure. And until that is addressed, and that's where our money is going, it's what's causing for mostly the problems to be that we have now. And I really resent the fact that the general manager, when we've got a finance committee and infrastructure committee trying to help solve the issues, to look at what's wrong and try to address and help, that you then end up accusing them or blaming them and the community. Then in 2016, we had a 5-year rate increase, of which we're in the 3rd year. Bartle & Wells, we're the same consultant. He looked at what we had, and it was all going to be just fine, and the CIPs, we were going to get them done. Nothing, not even the influence screen was put in. And you're working on that still. Yet we can afford to have thousands of dollars spent to consultants, to attorneys for harassment and retaliation, all kinds of things. And yet the people of this community need to recognize where their money is going and not to be blamed for because you don't have enough. You've had plenty. It's about how you have chosen to spend it. I could go help you go through that expenditure report and cut out a ton of stuff that's just nothing but sheer waste. I really resent it. So here is the protest form. It's ready to go as soon as you get your letter out. But I would ask that you take your time, because one day is not long enough to hear from these committees and for a decision to be made by management to go ahead and for the board to vote on a rate increase until a lot more thought has gone into it. Thank you.
Mr. Howell.
Don Howell. A couple of comments. Yes, I am somewhat disturbed. The general manager generally addresses most of these things with apologies and excuses as to why we're here, and that's not really helpful. I think what I'm hearing and what I happen to concur with Mr. Lee and Director Rice, this rush forward to this particular rate increase is premature. So I would ask one question, particularly of Director Beringer, is what is so, because of the motion which Director Beringer put on the floor at the last board meeting, what is the hurry? What is so special about September 1st? I would like to know that, because I know you can approve a budget at the end of August based upon what you have. You do not need to have these new rates in order to establish a budget. It may well be that you need to take an austerity plan. But having said that, that's just a question on the floor which I think the public might like to hear an answer to. I'd like to respond very quickly. Ms. Steidel, very, very well thought out recommendations, and I would like to see something like that actually in the form of a motion and a set of procedures going forward. And absent that, again, I think moving to a rate increase without a capital asset management plan, maybe we have an old one, but it's out of date, we were told. Therefore, it's not terribly useful. So we need that. We need policies. Apropos of policies, these two committees are really the place that could be formulating policies to bring to the board. It is not up to the general manager to bring policies to the board. It's up to the community and the board to reach these. Again, we do not want to have the tail wagging the dog. Particularly on page 8, the sentence here which kind of came to my attention in the general observations, he says, in others, lack of the underlying decision-making process drives the challenges heard, and you're hearing the challenges today. Unfortunately, it manifests itself in lack of visibility and lack of trust, and lack of trust is what we're talking about. I'd like to quote just a very brief sentence from the Sustainable Water Facility draft subsequent EIR it was brought to the community, I think, in August of 2016. The second bullet in the in the executive summary, the section regarding goals and objectives. Now, before I read this, I want to remind people of a town hall meeting that was held not too long ago where it was emphasized by members of the board that the so-called SWF is not intended for growth. I wish to quote from the second bullet of the SEIR. One of the purposes of the Sustainable Water Facility is to provide a reliable water supply which would serve no more than 4,650 existing and future residential units, that is to say, the CCSD wait list, at full build-out pursuant to the North Coast Area Plan. So, either it's supposed to support opening the wait list or it is not. We need to have a very clear statement, because this this aspect of the so-called SWF was never, to my knowledge, actually been discussed and agendized and brought before the public. The repurposing of the emergency water supply to ultimately support an additional 600 and something connections. Now, that sounds like growth to me, even if it's a compromise, it's still growth. So what I'm trying to tell you is we need to have clarity and honesty. The public feels, I'm sure I do, and I'm not alone, feels that we have been, if at worst perhaps hoodwinked, certainly baited and switched in terms of the rate increase that was approved by the public, including myself, to support the emergency water supply, that we have not been well used, and that the district, the former boards and the management of the district has been very, very free with our money. Which brings me to the next and last point, which was brought forth, I think, by Mr. Lee, is that it's many of us, I think, are reluctant, even though we might see the necessity of a rate increase. We might see the necessity, but without any clear indication that the board, this current board, has taken control of the spending and established policies, and such that we can say that we know that the money that we have approved, will go where it is intended, because so far that has not been happening. And so we have very little reason, even though this is a new board, we have very little reason until we see some evidence that the board will do and pursue things as it is said. Anyway, enough of that. Thank you.
I think, if I might, I think that this joint committee meeting is an attempt to move in that direction.
Yes.
Dave, should I address his issue?
If you would.
Thank you for the question. The rate study was conducted over a long period of time, certainly most of this year. On May 24th, so that's not just yesterday, May 24th, we had the presentation from a professional who identified what the rates needed to do. Later on, when our committee comes up, we're going to get an overview from Mr. Gressens on what will happen if we do or don't do things. The CIP list that Director Farmer and I looked at a year ago, when we had a zero budget, there were a lot of things that we just couldn't do. So I think what the rate study does is it gives an amount of money that we need, and my position, or I think the only responsible position one I could take, is to make sure we get the rates, if they're approved, as soon as possible, because we're behind the 8 ball. And we'll see some of the things we can or can't do. So May 24th, an excellent consultant, plenty of conversations with the ad hoc committee regarding the rates. We're going to see some of those things today. But to kick the can, and what we're going to spend it for, I believe that the Finance Committee is going to be able, on a regular basis, meeting and show, and if there's a change in what should be done, but we need some money in order to start spending it. So that's why I think that September 1st is important, because we're bleeding now, and we're not able to, and the consequences of not doing it, of pushing it down the road, maybe we'll see the danger of having a sanitary sewer overflow, which would cost us tons of money, or other things that are going to break, or even the influence screen. I don't think needs to be put through. So I think a delay is that's why I think it's somewhat urgent. Maybe we'll see a little bit.
Good. No, please, your turn. Yes. Dennis.
Dennis Perry once again. I'm a little dismayed, surprised, and quite frankly, more than disappointed that I hear management saying, well, we don't really have good control of our costs, but if you give us some more, we will have control of our costs in the future. I don't believe that. I don't think our community believes that. We've already given you a bundle of money and you've misspent it, and you can't even account for all of it. We just heard that from our manager, right? I also heard him say, We have an asset management plan, but it's out of date. What manager in the world, in any kind of a rational, efficient organization, would not keep their asset plan current? And why aren't you guys holding them responsible to do that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Barringer, could you please tell me what you were referring to with the influence screen?
I take it back. I think the influence screen is going to be installed.
You believe it should be?
Of course.
That's not what you inferred a couple of minutes ago.
Maybe I misspoke.
Okay, thank you for that. The other thing that I wanted to say was that the majority of Cambrians did vote for the emergency water supply to be used in drought conditions for current residents, for nothing else. That's what they voted on. There was no other vote taken for any other alternative. The other thing was that in 2016, another rate increase, the 5-year, and I mentioned that just a minute ago, but what I failed to mention was as soon as you guys got that money, an 11% rate salary increase was implemented for admin and the fire chief, just right after the fire chief received his position as fire chief with an excellent salary. That's why we don't trust where our money will be going. There are no guarantees. And as long as the management or mismanagement of this district continues, there are no guarantees as to where our money will be going. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, there's a lady in the back there. Marvin, right behind you, okay?
Yes, Marvin Korn. I am a new resident here, but I've been attending enough of these meetings and have heard enough of the back and forth, the lack of trust and so forth. I would like to say that, to me, the establishment of these two standing committees is probably the greatest step toward establishing transparency, oversight, and good decision-making that could possibly have happened, and I congratulate the board on that. As I say, a new resident here, what keeps me awake at night is that I'll get up and turn on my faucet and I won't have water, or I flush my toilet and nothing happens. So regardless of how we got here, what the background is, or what the resentments may be, we have a situation in our town that we need to address. And my background is 44 years in banking. To me, risk assessment is number one. We got to know what our risks are. And then number two, don't get wrapped up in analysis paralysis. Take action, adjust the action as we go, and make it reasonable. To borrow your phrase, kicking the can down the road one more time doesn't make a whole lot of sense when we might get up and flush that toilet or turn the faucet on and nothing happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Karen Pearson. And I'm just a little confused. Are we keeping the Finance Committee for input? Good. And the other comment that I had is if this goes through, I think that it would be very prudent to freeze salaries. That way, maybe we could get a little bit of trust going, and maybe we could have a little bit of give and take. Thank you.
Thank you.
On the staff issue.
Oh,
if
go
I
ahead.
might. So two things. Freezing salaries with the unions is not a possibility when we're in the midst of a contract. We are entering a phase of contract negotiations with the unions and the management and confidential employees. The other thing to know is, and I'm sure Ms. Madrid can be especially clear on the specifics, but the raise that was provided to the management and confidential employees following that rate increase was something that happened because when the contracts for the unions was approved, the management and confidential employees agreed to forego their raises that traditionally they would be getting at the same time. Traditionally, in this district, whatever the increases are that happen with the unions is then reflected in the correct me if I'm wrong, but is reflected in the increases that are provided to the management and confidential employees. So they were it was 18 months or something. Yes, is that okay? So 18 months that they did not get the same increase that traditionally, historically, the district had provided to those employees that are not unionized and not under contract. So the 11% was what they would, it caught them up with what they would have otherwise gotten. They did not receive back pay for those increases, though. That was an increase going forward, not covering they forewent those increases, those raises for 18 months and did not get back pay to cover that. Is that true? So I just wanted to make that clear. Now, salary freezes at this point is something that we can be considering with the unions once we get into that, but that's not where we are yet. And so it's good to know from the community that that might be something that the board should consider. But I just wanted to clarify on those points. Thank you.
Okay, Jim?
Yeah, just to follow through, if the rates are approved, it doesn't affect the fire department because, as was stated, we have 5 funds, and the water funds have to be, by law, applied to water, wastewater, and the emergency project. So by approving the change in rates doesn't do anything for the fire department or anybody else. We have to use that out of the general funds. One of the problems we've had is that we've been spending general funds on the enterprise funds inappropriately. So that's just a clarification.
Yes. Okay. Thank you all for all of your comments. I think, to summarize, we need some policies put in place that are going to make the community feel good that we're doing the right thing with the money if we go forward with the rates. First, I think we need a policy on CIP that spells out how we will go about having a CIP, what will happen, and basically I think especially on the project management and financial side, there needs to be some delineation similar to what Cindy's paper had on there. And I think for each of the projects that we're looking to get approved, that there needs to be a sheet that spells out exactly why it's needed, what it's going to do for us, what the outcome will be, what the cost is going to be, et cetera, and timeline, that kind of thing, so that it can come before the board, because all of them are over $25,000. They'll come before the board either as part of a budget or individually, and the board will then be able to approve them as the monies become available. It makes sense to me. So, 1, we need a policy on CIP that addresses those issues. 2, we need a better policy on budget and how we go about, approving the budget and when it should be and what the role of the finance committee is and that kind of thing. So if we have such a thing, General Manager, I don't know if we have a budget policy or not, but we should have one, and it needs to include a lot of those things. Third, and one of the things that should be in that budget is a rate information, and that we should be having a rate schedule done every 3 years regardless, just to see where we are we spending the money as we should be spending the money, and do we need to raise the rates, or if we were so blessed, lower the rates. I mean, if we got a grant for $5 million to do some of this work, I could see that we could lower the rates at some point in time. It probably won't happen, but we need to keep that in mind, okay? So every 3 years, I think, would be a good time to do that. So that should be part of the budget also. And finally, the reserve policy that we do have is dysfunctional at best and needs to be revised. And I think Amanda had a very good point that we need to make sure that we're setting aside a certain amount of monies. And the recommended policy that I saw from the CSDA said, okay, we're going to have 3 different categories inside that reserve. One is to cover budget overruns. One is to look at CIP, and the other one was to do something else. But separating those funds so that we are transparent as where we're putting that money and where we're taking it from on a regular basis. I think all of that needs to be done. So I would recommend that all 3 of those happen, and they happen as soon as possible. I think that we have members sitting here on these 2 committees that could do a good job on all of those and bring those back to us, and bring those to the individual committees probably for review, and then on to the board for review. The CIP certainly should be part of the infrastructure committee's bailiwick. The budget and the reserve policy should be part of the finance committee's work. So I would recommend that at the very next meeting of both of those committees, that those be on the agenda and that those be something that they appoint a couple of their members to go ahead and do and bring back to us as soon as possible so that we can implement those before we start spending any money on these projects, etc. Questions or comments on that plan, at least, as far as that goes? Yes.
As soon as possible. I've been on this board for a long time. As soon as possible is not, to me, definitive enough. If we could have a goal set that even if we end up having to push it off like that by the September regular board meeting, by the October regular board meeting, we will have a referral from each of the committees on this policy. I think without at least an attempt to set a deadline, it concerns me that it'll just end up getting, being president for 2 years, I know how much stuff gets.
I'm fine with that. Jim, what's your...
Well, I agree. I think that
Is there a month that works?
what we could do is have each committee, after each meeting, present at least one policy every month, forever if we want, so that there is a goal, so that something actually happens in August and September. I think we can come up with a couple of those policies. And I agree with your suggestions.
Okay, so maybe by the September full board meeting, you guys would have your CIP policy ready for review?
We would have at least progress and one policy that we could, if we at least have one policy each time, and then we'll improve and add more and et cetera over a period of time. And Vice Chair, and Director Farmer, are you in agreement with that kind of thing?
I would be in agreement with that. I do want to point out, Chair.
He's got it.
It's on. Chairperson Behringer, not to beat up on Jim, but at our last meeting, you suggested that soon we only had to meet every 3 months. So I just hope that we're realizing that we actually need to be a little bit more efficient than that for an extended period of time.
I see that there's enough work to do each month. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. We need to meet at least once a month. But I also like the way this meeting is. I like the way this meeting is going, so that the Finance Committee and the Infrastructure Committee are able to interact with each other publicly. I would also like to see a joint meeting like this once every 3 months.
Sounds good. And Mr. Cliff?
I think you got the cart before the horse. I think the board ought to be directing what these committees do, not these committees necessarily. So if you want the infrastructure committee to bring a policy every month, say so at the board. If you want the finance committee to bring forth policies that can be approved by the board, say so. I get really frustrated at a board that won't make a decision. Now, either make a decision or don't. Either kick these projects down the road, there's millions of them over there, or find new revenues, or cut expenses. There's been a discussion about, oh, we ought to do this, we ought to do that. Make a decision. If the board ought to be deciding that if management needs to cut back 20%, tell them to cut back 20%. That's your duty. If you think rates ought to be raised 20%, put it to the people and tell them we need the rates raised 20%. The vacillation that goes on here and the analysis, my banker friend back there, I appreciate a business viewpoint that says get something done. So there's a whole bunch of projects over there. The infrastructure committee recommended 2 projects because the board only put $95,000 in the budget. What more can the infrastructure committee do if you don't come up, if the board doesn't say we're going to set aside a certain amount of money or we're going to create a certain amount of revenue, and I don't care how you create it, whether it's rates or sell something or what. But I would like to see the board in one of your next meetings say, we expect these things from these committees, rather than just putting off on these committees, oh, we're going to be transparent by having a committee. Come on, board, step up, tell us what you expect out of us, and we'll give it to you.
If I might, I think that the board today, without having to take formal action, is saying that. I haven't heard from Director Wharton, but I don't think that I've heard any director disagree with the general direction that we've been talking about. So I think that you are hearing that the board wants to have that from the committees. Correct me if I'm.
But you're not doing it as a board action. You're doing it as a discussion.
Okay. So
it's the first step.
You might as well be having coffee.
Understood. So we will make sure there's some. That's completely understood, and I appreciate that input. I think that's not a problem. I think the vice president and I can make sure we have an agenda item that says as much.
Sure. And to be clear, this is the first time that we could speak directly to each other. So this joint committee meeting is maybe the genesis of something like that. And yes, one of the things I've noticed is that the CIP, we look at the CIP, we have a CIP, but it always goes over to finance. So finance is looking at it. So that there's a duplication of effort that could be consolidated into a joint finance and infrastructure, because to say why I'm reluctant to meet all the time. One, first of all, we need money to spend. I mean, we're not going to change this. The CIP was almost exactly the way it is a year ago. And so to go over that every month, now policy-wise, it's a good idea to have infrastructure policies, but that could be part of a finance committee. So I think there's a lot of duplicative effort. What I'd like to say, though, is that if the finance committee is done with their portion, if we could move on to the next agenda item, I think that we
have a couple of comments from public, and then we will. My next thing is to turn it over.
Thank you.
Yes, Dennis first.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis Perry. So if the goal for these committees is to generate a policy a meeting or a policy a month or whatever the number is that you choose to come up with as a board to request of the committees, I would also request that in that policy or some other document that there be benchmarks, milestones, completion dates, and some method for evaluating whether those milestones and completion dates are being met or not, what the variances are, and those somehow be reported to us, the ratepayers, so that we can have the confidence that the money you're requiring of us is actually being spent the way you say it's going to be done. And I heard somebody, it might have been Ms. Rice, say that, address this point earlier about how are we going to have the community have confidence that we are spending the money as we say we're going to spend it. As I'm driving along the highway, I see in various counties and various states perhaps, signs on the side of the road that says this is your Prop 237 money at work right now, estimated completion spring 2019. We could get some of those little signs printed for CCSD, so every time they dig up the road, you can put in a sign that says, this is the project, this is where the money came from, and this is when we anticipate having it done. Just move that sign around from place to place. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Don.
Thank you, Don Howell. I would prefer to hear, Dave, what I heard was you proposing some specific policies that the committees could come up with. What I didn't hear was a time frame. What I heard from Jim was that, but maybe we could only just do one or two at a time, and maybe this in context, we're saying, we got to rush with the rates, but let's just take the policies a little bit at a time. This doesn't set well with me at all. It seems to me that it is also true, as Merle suggests, that of course the board ultimately has to decide one way or another, but it's certainly within these committees' charges to have a motion amongst yourself to say we shall come up with policies X, Y, and Z, or X by such and such a date. I'd like to hear a little more from the infrastructure committee, which I'm sure you'll get your chance, as to how you would feel about not just picking away a little bit, some policy today, some policy, but that could be anything. I'd like to hear something, policies about the CIP, policies about controlling spending, something that's got some meat in it. I'd like to hear Cindy's recommendations, some of those be implemented. I'd like to hear some motions and some actual official action. And what I'm hearing on this side of the thing right now, since you guys haven't really had to speak, but what I'm hearing is kind of a temporizing sort of, well, maybe, but maybe not, and maybe I don't want to really, we can't. I know it's a hard job and it takes a long time. Directors know how long it takes just to be a director. In some sense, I suspect from these committee members may end up spending even more time than the directors do in their job in order to come up. This is a hard job, and if you're on a committee and it's too hard and too much, then maybe it would be well to step aside and let somebody else who has the energy or the interest to go in and take over from that. There's no reason that you should be there if you don't want to be. This is a voluntary situation. But what I am hearing is a lot of temporizing on this side, and I'm hearing this side saying, let's go forward. So can we have some discussion about that, perhaps?
Yes, I'd like to see that at the end when we get to number 4, where we are actually finalizing. But yes, ma'am.
You're not hearing much from this side of the room because we don't have the floor yet. This is still the Finance Committee's part of the presentation. The Infrastructure Committee has not yet had a chance to do theirs, but I would like to say something. I have attended every one of the Finance Committee's meetings, and I would like to say that the 5 people on this committee are very qualified to be on this committee. They have done a very thorough job of looking at the CCSD's finances and questioning everything that they have seen on those budget reports that they have the least bit of concern about. These committees were formed to give the public clarity, to have a sense of accountability of how the rates are being spent, and to help develop a little bit of more trust in what's going on with their money. And I think that you can be assured that this committee, the Finance Committee, is doing their best to oversee the money situation of this district. Thank you.
and let me vacillate some more. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is there should be a very soon policy, and let's just pick one out of the air. Let's say asset management. I think the infrastructure committee could do an asset management policy, and we should do it soon. But we're not going to do. But I think that we should, on a regular basis, continue rather than wait a year and come up with policies for infrastructure. I think that's unreasonable. So that's the way I would think we would approach that. So.
Okay, now unless we have some more commentary from the Finance Committee, I'm going to turn it over to Jim and let him.
Okay, thank you. I do know that one of the task items that the Finance Committee gave to staff was to put together a presentation on what can be done without a rate increase, those items that could be done with a rate increase, and the Infrastructure Committee spent a lot of time in doing that. And I think that an additional task that the Finance Committee put on staff was to show what the implications of not having a rate increase would be. And I believe, if it's okay with our committee, that Mr. Gressens has a presentation that he can make, and after that, I think we can go from there. Is that acceptable? Well, let's get the presentation. Hopefully, it's done in 10 minutes. Or, yeah, right. Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I don't know how to address Madam President and everyone else up there, but yeah, I'm Bob Gressens. Can you hear me okay? All right. I just have a brief PowerPoint to kind of summarize where we've been with the committees, and I got to add, I'm very impressed with all of you and everybody here in the audience, because it's like to me, it's like being a supercomputer of collective wisdom, and it really comes from different angles. So I'm always impressed with these meetings. Okay, just a little background. We have a listing of CIP projects was developed to identify investment needs over multiple years to coordinate with financing and timing of projects. The projects were identified based on, numerous discussions with operating staff over the years, as well as we had earlier meetings with the ad hoc infrastructure committee, which was Director Behringer and Director Farmer. Oops, we lost our slide somehow. Let's plug that back in. Thank you. So we've had these discussions now with the infrastructure committee. And so I was just going to provide you a brief overview of proposed capital improvement projects for water, wastewater, and the SWF. I don't have facilities and resources in here, for example. So without spending any more time here, let me get into this a little. I may need your help advancing the thing unless I'm pointing it at the wrong. Does that have an antenna on, or how's that? Nope. Well, let's try it again.
No, it's over here.
Oh.
Just say next slide.
Okay, next slide then. Thank you. Yep. So next slide. Oh, try it now. There we go. Great. Thank you. And we have some basic priority levels that staff assigned, and we can tweak this further. Our level 1 is the highest, and level 4 is the lowest. Generally speaking, level 1 is pushed as most urgently needed. It's typically mandated by a law or regulation or a key safety need. Level 2 projects are generally needed to improve operational efficiencies. They'll save on costs, including labor, and that may include, in our case, it's usually worn out equipment and past its useful life. Level 3 projects help to conserve or protect assets. They may enhance the reliability of the operation, have a little lower return on investment sometimes than others. In other words, it would take more years to pay back. Level 4 projects are more anticipatory and they're future projected needs, and we have no level 4 projects, so just to let you know. Some of the abbreviations, there have been comments and emails and so forth about not understanding abbreviations, so I put this slide in here for those who want to know. WW is wastewater, and BNR was biological nutrient removal, and some of this relates more to the wastewater list of projects. Here's the overall process that we've been following here. Between the committees and budgeting, we have an annual operating budget, and then we have our CIP plan, which are all the projects on the posters there, and then we have the rate study. And we're trying to coordinate all three of these. And it's iterative. It goes different directions, but that's basically what we've been doing here, is trying to tie it all together. So from the rate study analysis, we had future projects for water at about $5.7 million. What we did is at staff level, we split the fiscal year 18-19 in half. So we have a first half, which has just the basic projects that are in the budget right now. And then we have the second half is more of the projects that we're wanting to complete. And you'll see some initial phases on those. And so that was our basic approach to figuring out how do we wrestle through getting a budget done when you're in the middle of a 218 process. So we just split the fiscal year in half, and you'll see that on the water, wastewater, and SWF. I took a real rough cut at the 5.7 million to a little, present worth type analysis, and I came up with about 580,000 per year over a 10-year period. It's kind of a line where I could draw my cost to figure out what would fit under that, and I'll get into that in a second. And there's 3 Bartle Wells scenarios identified in their study. There's the front load scenario where they have $700,000 a year, and they'll fund all your projects. There's a phased approach where they kind of stagger the rate increase and how much they get each year. So year 1 is $400,000, year 2 is $600,000, year 3 is $700,000, and it kind of levels at $700,000. In that case, you might have to delay certain projects unless you use the proceeds or you get some debt financing instrument in place. And I'll get into that in a second. Then there's a third scenario, which is the reduced phase, where they have 300, 400, 500,000, and it levels off. So let me show you what I'm talking about a little bit better. On these poster boards, and I apologize for the very tiny print here, but I try to highlight them. I looked at the bottom here, and the bottom line here, this is what we have on the poster boards. Like, here's all the water projects. We have and I had to hide the column for priority to get this to fit, but I highlighted some of the ones that would have to be delayed if we didn't have some kind of a loan instrument in place. But you can see here we have like over $1 million on these particular years. So $700,000 a year, you're going to have to accrue some funding or else get a loan to help cover some of these peaks. And so if we had to delay anything, the projects that would have to be delayed would be the Rodeo Grounds pump station, the Stewart Street tank replacement, and some of the water meter replacements. We'd have to finesse that if you didn't want to get a loan. But otherwise, I think a loan would be more than adequate with these. I did the same thing for wastewater. I looked at future expenses at about $8.7 million. Equivalent cost is around $890,000 a year. Again, there's 3 Bartle Well studies or scenarios, and then we can get all the projects done. It's just how you would have to kind of stagger and get a loan to use the stepwise or the phased and reduced phase approaches. And again, I was looking at the bottom line here at over $1 million for some of these, or over the $800,000 threshold, which means to cover these years, you'd have to get some kind of loan instrument or else push them back and then accrue the funds and then do them in a subsequent year. Now, I want to make sure I capture the point that Director Behringer is making, because the way to quickly answer, what can you do
with no rate increase and what you can't do, it's just simply look down this column, this first half fiscal year 18-19. You may have to do it during the break and look at the poster boards that we blew up for you. But these are the only projects that were funded in the budget, and they're mostly some of the bigger hit costs are like the what do we call it? The vacuum excavator and some of the vehicles and moving equipment that is definitely needed. We have some meter replacements that start up in there. So anything that's outside of this column, the second half, you can't do without a rate increase. So we just don't, they're too numerous to list, but I can go over these charts and give them to you verbally if you want a verbal report on that. And so the same is true of wastewater. We have this first column, 195,000, and I don't know why I don't see those numbers. I think I hid the column by mistake, but it's $45,000 for the hand railings at the sludge digesters and $150,000 to install the influence screen. Those are two items in the wastewater budget that are currently approved. SWF, I won't go into a whole lot on this, but we had two projects to support getting the regular coastal development permit, and then we had, that's consulting time. That's for the Section 7 environmental ESA process, and then we had two projects for off-hauling the RO concentrate, and that's because we don't have the pond operational. Then we had three projects for the advanced water treatment plant, 4 long-term projects, and 2 projects to support closure to impoundment. And I think Mr. Crosby Schwartz always raises great questions. I think you had an excellent question on the one about why do we have that surface water treatment thing. Simply to improve reliability. And then we thought we could get another 20 acre feet or so stored in that pond once it stops use, and to use that pond for a different purpose, you have to have a surface water treatment plant. But we push that way off into the future. It's not a high priority. I think I gave that a level 3 priority, but we pushed it way out so we can accrue some funds and not get a big hit early on with that. There's also some projects that can be funded through an existing federal Army Corps, and that says Prop 84, I apologize. That's the Water Resource Development Act. It's a WRDA, so scratch that on your notes. Missed that point. But we have an existing WRDA grant in place with the Army Corps. It's been pretty dormant for many years now, but it's still in their program. But that's a 75% federal and a 25% local grant. And we have a $3 million local credit that the feds have approved in the past. It's subject to meeting their criteria, so there has to be a real detailed discussion to make sure the Army Corps agrees. But I highlighted some of the potential WRDA projects in red behind you on the boards here that show that you might already have the funding for it if you use that credit and use the 75% match. But it's a very slow process. You have to go through the Army Corps process. It's years in the making to get them to change their project management plan. A lot of meetings, a lot of discussions to get to that point. They have to budget it every year to make sure your project is budgeted. But that's potential. And then for fiscal year 18-19, we had about $265,000 identified, and that would come up out of that set-aside fund that was for capital. And I think I heard $710,000. I don't have the exact number in my head. It was $733 or $738 on one of our earlier presentations for Fund 40, which was intended to be for capital, including getting the regular coastal development permit process completed. So that, and then I don't want to bore you with this fuzzy slide here with the details, but again, I'd be glad to stand by those charts and answer any questions during a break, whatever the appropriate time is to go through that.
And there's just really quick committees and board. There's just 3 variables that I want to discuss. First of all, it's the 2 projects that Bob identifies. Army Corps of Engineers, that's really a policy decision by the board if they want to pursue that. And then the ultimate the ultimate decision to be regarding the impoundment basin, again, that's a policy decision whether we move forward or we abandon it in its entirety, and that's a future discussion. And the third variable I want to discuss is that the board at the last board meeting, you guys, the board approved moving forward with PG&E on the assessment portion of that three-phase project for the three-step process for the wastewater treatment plant, hopefully to include the lift stations. And so what does that mean as it relates to all this? As Brent Patera said, it's a 2-year process. So many of the things identified on the CIP list as far as the wastewater treatment plant goes could be incorporated into that partnership with PG&E. Now, ultimately, there is going to need to be some, when they get to the audit portion, if you recall, that's the 35% design, and in the next phase, design, build, and ready to go. There is going to be some matching funds obviously required. As Brent indicated, he's going to be looking at low interest loans. He's going to be looking at the Department of Energy, state revolving funds, all those things. But a component that will enable us to move forward with that process is having our financial house in order as it relates to rates. If there is, say if everything comes across at several $1 million, and we have a portion of that in energy cost savings, if we have a portion of it in state revolving funds, if we have a portion of it through the Department of Energy, and then there's a portion left that we're required to come up with from a cash perspective, you can do one of two things at that point. You can borrow the money, or if we have enough cash on hand in reserves for the enterprise fund, which is wastewater, then we can pay as we go. But again, you have to have a rate structure that in place that would enable you to borrow those funds as part of a state revolving fund at a very low interest rate, possibly even zero, to have a rate structure in place that would be able to support that. We're not going to be eligible for any kind of grants or any kind of low interest loans based on our current financial status within the wastewater treatment department. And the reason being is it's that deficit spending. Any institution, whether it's a bank or the state, will look at that and say, your existing rate structure does not fund the operational component of that department, therefore we're not going to loan you any money, and rightfully so. What bank would? So the PG&E is a big component, and how do we separate all this from this? My recommendation would be we move forward with PG&E. We see how that process goes. We see how many items on the CIP can get done with that. And we see how much money we're going to need to contribute to that, what monies are available. And it doesn't hurt, as Cindy indicated, she referenced the unknown. It doesn't hurt to have a reserve in your wastewater department for those things that are unknown. So I just Bob did a great job on this, but so in parallel to all this, there's still the PG&E partnership that we're undertaking right now. So.
Thank you. I think I just had one last slide. Yeah, there you go. Questions?
Yeah, I have one, and Bob, I know you're doing a fair job, but I think what the Finance Committee was saying, and especially from Cindy Steidel, was to say, what is if we delay these projects, how does it hurt us? And I'll just take two. You have water meter replacements that goes out a long way. And some people in the public feel that there's a lot of more production than that we capture. In other words, we're not capturing the use. Well, the meters, we might have water losses. We're not losing water in the ground. We're losing revenue because going through the meters, we're not capturing. They're under gauging. Or you have a lift station. You delay that, the possibility of a sanitary sewer overflow is a risk. That risk management could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. You pushed off videotaping the collection system. that has to be done each year. Those things, it's really easy to say, well, we're pushing these off. What we need the public to understand is that there's delaying revenue is going to be a cost over the long run to the district. And I think the direction from the Finance Committee was, show us why, if we push it back, what the penalties are. I don't see a clear position of that. If perhaps what we do is we take a break for 20 minutes, have everybody take a look at the CIP lists, carry on just a conversation with you. You can't eat. We'll just look at those, and if you could point out some of those things, and then when we reconvene, you can address some of those things. And Director Farmer, what are your thoughts?
That's fine. If you folks feel like you need to take a break, that's okay.
What is your? Okay, so we take a break from 12:10.
It gives us an opportunity to kind of digest all of the stuff that's already been said in the presentation that Bob just gave, and Bob can stand if he doesn't
stand by those charts
so we can
and talk about
questions.
things. And I think that would be worthwhile.
I'm glad to do that. Yeah, I'm glad to do that.
So we'll reconvene at 12:30. Is that correct?
And
sure.
General Manager,
Yeah.
Mr. Gruber.
Mr. Gruber. Yeah.
All right, do we have enough sandwiches to feed these people out here too? Okay, good. So please feel free to have lunch with us, okay? And ask us questions, and then we're going to reconvene at 12:30, right?
12:30, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just the wastewater large chart, just because it's something that he can demonstrate, and point out some of the things that, if we don't have a rate increase, some of the risks that we might face by pushing off some of these projects. And so, Bob, let me give you 9 minutes or so, and if anybody from the public wants to chat with you, let's do that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. There you go. Okay.
So this is the wastewater.
Yeah, could you? Hold it down.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this is the wastewater sheet, for example. And, okay, let me make sure that's better.
I can raise this.
Can the camera still see that from the back, David? Okay, good. So there's a real good point made by Director Pearson earlier. A sheet, a one-page sheet with the justification and so forth. We do have that in the past. I mean, I did it over a dozen years ago, and it collected dust. So I can resurrect that and do a capital improvement program sheet for each one of these. But I'll just briefly talk about a few of them. Let me pick one out, for example, the motor control center for the wastewater treatment plant. We need to replace the old motor control center that's there. So we have a couple of projects here near the top of this.
For example, you need some electrical engineering to design it, to figure out exactly what needs to be done and put into a bid package. And then we have for the, let me slip down for the, like 5A and 5B. 5B says replace main incoming power motor control center with a Y configuration supply. That's just fancy electrical jargon, how many wires the thing's going to be designed for. But you need to do that. That's been told to us by the Energy Watch group, that if we want to be part of their program, that we have to take care of that first. They don't want to invest in the plant unless you have the power straightened out at the head of the plant that feeds the rest of the plant. So there's a whole justification of why that's shown there with a high priority to qualify us for that program. And Jerry was talking about the PG&E partnership. That's all tied to that, where you might get some help on matching funds or using energy conservation to help offset a portion of the project cost, depending on how that project's defined. So those are an example of the things that would go into a justification or risk-reward type discussion. Let's talk about another one here. Number 8, automate the aeration dissolved oxygen control system, main air header, DO probes, and so forth. That's directly related to your energy use. We don't have a very good control system in place at the plant, so it has a tendency to waste energy, particularly when your dissolved oxygen demand is at a low point. It's not throttling the blowers back properly and matching what's going on in the plant. So you want a more dynamic control system to cut your energy cost. There's several in the collection system that we list here. Let me just go into
Bob.
Collection system. Okay.
Bob,
yes,
let's go back to the motor control center for a minute, okay? And the 3-wire versus 4-wire. I understand that there's a problem there that is making us burn up pumps on a regular basis, and that's costing us money on a regular basis. Every year we're replacing a pump or two because surges through that 3-wire system because it's unprotected. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, although there'll be more to it than that. But this is kind of a rural area for distribution systems from like PG&E. So we have a 3-wire system or a delta wire system, and it's kind of inherent to have some voltage variation between the phases, and that can burn out motors. We've had several motors burn out, but to precisely put the responsibility on PG&E takes additional equipment that it has like millisecond accuracy in measuring. We're also looking at that too.
What I'm trying to get to is this is going to save us money. By replacing this MCC, it's going to end up saving us money because we're not going to be having to replace those pumps.
Yes, it'll save money in the long run, and it'll make the plant more reliable, and but it's also going to open the door for that program with PG&E and with Energy Watch. Okay. So I can get into any specific project you'd like on this.
Let's take one, for instance. I know that we're delaying the videotaping of the collection system, and that nobody cares about that, except if we don't make sure our collection system is stable and we don't fix the little problems there, we have a threat of a sanitary sewer overflow, and that could cost us a lot of money. It's imprudent for us not to spend money on that particular project. It's
correct.
Imprudent.
Yeah.
It's dangerous for us to. There's another one on there that.
Well, you have several threats from that too. If you infiltration inflow into the wastewater plant increases the flow and the cost to transport that water to the plant through the lift station, so forth, potentially causing a disruption of the plant itself. But also, when you have what they call a sanitary sewer overflow, you have a public health concern from what's being released into like the street out of a manhole cover. So that's a public health concern. It's an environmental concern. It could affect the economy, tourism, if you had to close a beach, for example. I mean, that all is all the risks that are out there from not doing that on a frequent enough basis or a substantial enough basis. At one time, we were saying we were going to do 20% of the system per year, and we had to back way off on that. So that's something we didn't have funds to do. So it's not happening. And we also, tied to the operating budget, we need more wastewater personnel to be on top of that too, because we're understaffed for the collection system.
Right. And let me add something that when the infrastructure committee went to highlight things that we needed, one of the things we said, and I think Director Farmer will attest to this, is that John Elshin wanted 2 collections people. He wanted to have them in so that we could do some of these things like videotape the system. And when the rate study committee got together, we said we wanted 2 people. By the time our professional came out and came up with Plan B, he said, no, we'll only put 1 person in year 1, and then we'll put 2 people in the second year. So by having this Plan B, which is the one I support, by the way, we aren't even getting the 2 people that we wanted. And it's because we wanted to reduce the first year impact of the rate increase. So we're already making compromises with the rate increase that we're proposing. And people need to understand that delaying some of these projects is going to cost us a lot more money in the long run if we delay those things. And if you have, maybe
I'll pass this to Jerry.
I just want to elaborate a little bit on what Bob said. So every gallon of water that you treat at the wastewater treatment plant that's not from a sanitary source, from your homes or businesses, it costs. It costs to pump the water to the plant. It costs money to treat it. So what you want to do is you want to reduce the amount of gallons coming into your plant. I&I, infiltration and intrusion. We've done a lot of work. So even though we haven't videoed a lot of these lines, we've identified problem areas, and we've replaced a lot of manholes in these manhole inserts in these low-lying areas. The last heavy rain that we had last year, historically the plant can shoot up to twice its capacity on these heavy flows. It was significantly reduced because we put these manhole inserts in. But again, what you want to do is, in camera in these lines, is you want to identify if there is a break somewhere to reduce the I&I. We have a high groundwater table here, and so every gallon that you have to treat that's not from a sanitary source, and it's just rainwater or groundwater, it's cost. So the cost, Jim, associated with that would be you're treating water where you don't need to treat it. So you might as well spend the money on the preventive side of it, taking care of the I&I, the infiltration and intrusion, versus having to treat that water, pump it twice, pump it 3 times. You're pumping it to the plant, you're pumping it through the plant, and then you're pumping it out to your spray fields. So there's real costs associated.
Let me ask one last one, and then I'll try and be quiet. And I hope that my other members can bring up issues. But at one time, you wanted to be able to have some meters, to have subsets of subzone metering. And what that would do, it's going to cost us money, but if we really are having losses, water losses, we'll be able to identify what part of the community the loss is at. Is that scheduled for the next year or 2?
Yes, I have that in the water sheet. I could go get that if you like.
Well, you don't have to go over there.
But we do have that as a separate project, and that's a real good point, because we not only do we need to replace the meters, the actual water meters, because they under-register, so you lose your revenue because you're basically giving away free water with poor meters. But the subzone metering helps you identify quicker where the leak is occurring in town. We had that major leak behind the Bluebird Inn, back in early, 2017 when that happened. We were having a heck of a time finding it. We ended up out at the campground for a while, thinking it was out in the state parks property when it wasn't. It turned out to be underneath the creek where you couldn't see the leak. So if you had some subzone metering, you can isolate the areas better. There's other ways to do that with meters too. There's these intelligent meters that you can get on the fly readings from that'll do that too, but they're a step above the meters that we have right now. So we have to look at that whole thing in combination with the meter upgrades.
Well, what I have is related to what you said about the subzone metering. In our meeting on infrastructure committee meeting on June 13th, we added this that was number 9 on the subzone metering as a priority. The question I have is, if you don't have the money to change the meters any faster than you already have been doing, is it more cost effective in the short run to do this subzone metering? If you only, I think you said you needed 5 zones at that point.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about the cost of lost water per meter. That's something you won't be able to bill. But if it prevents or helps you identify the location of a major leak faster, then we all benefit by not losing that fresh water. So is it cheaper to install, let's say, 5 subzone meters quicker and then proceed as well as you can with the individual meter replacements?
I don't know offhand if it's cheaper. I think it would be cheaper to do 5 subzone meters than do all the town's meters, but you spread out the timing, how many percent of the meters you do every year, maybe spread it out over 5-6 years instead of trying to do it within a year or two. I'd have to come back with you with better specific numbers on the cost of those 5 versus how many percent meters you'd replace each year. There's probably a balance in there somewhere, but it's a good question.
We might come to that.
A good answer.
If we're really tight on the budget, then we may not. It may be an either or for a while.
Okay, let me. I know Director Farmer wants to ask a question, and then we'll have our vice chair ask a question. Then we'll get back to you. Okay.
Put this down so you can see.
I don't know if I necessarily want to ask a question. I'd like to make a few comments, if that's okay. And I'm looking here in our agenda packet under what is this, page 6, page 5. I'll take my glasses off so I can see better. Page 6 under benefits of a CIP, and the benefits include, and we have one, the ability to stabilize debt and consolidate projects to reduce borrowing costs. And I think, I believe our general manager alluded to this, due to our financial circumstances, we really can't borrow any money right now. Thank God that we do have this the new program that's going to be implemented with PG&E, so at least we'll have some financial assistance with them. But with regard to borrowing, I don't think that's going to be happening. And then also it says a focus on preserving infrastructure while ensuring the efficient use of public funds. And that is the main concern of the members of this community. If we have this rate increase, I'd be interested in knowing personally the rate increase that is currently in effect. How have those monies been spent? Have they been spent productively on infrastructure? And I ask that because when we took the tour of the plant, I believe it was in early June, or May, the end of May. And these are just some of the things that John Alchin, the supervisor at wastewater, pointed out. And for what happened at the end, and I'll start with the end of our tour, he talked about the fact that the installation of the influence screen should have been done long ago, and that we've lost 4 motors and 2 pumps due to the debris that has gone into the sewer plant because we haven't installed the influence screen, which is still sitting out there as we speak. And I guess we're getting bids on that. But that's something that, do people have faith in the decision-making process that's taking place with the district? And here's one example as to why there should be a major concern. Because the influence screen should have been installed a long time ago. We should have had one in there a long time ago, and yet it's still an alarming problem that we have. He also mentioned what Bob has alluded to, the need for the motor control center needing upgrading. John Alchin also mentioned that the 3 blowers that we have out there, and I think Bob has alluded to this, serious energy draw, the biggest power draw that we have. He said too much air is being used on odor control. That's a significant amount of power use out there at the plant. And then he also talked about the sludge pumps, which Bob can probably elaborate on what that means, or our general manager can do that too. But he said those are running at 1/3 capacity. These are problems that have existed for a long time, and it's kind of heartbreaking that this is the case. I'd be interested in knowing, and I'm kind of going off on a side tangent here, but over there, the boards that we have, and that includes the SWF, and I'd be interested in knowing also with regard to the wastewater facility. We have projected what it is that we're needing to attend to, where the monies are going to be spent. I'd be interested in knowing, perhaps we could go back 5 years and find out what monies have been spent on wastewater, where those monies have been spent, what monies have been spent on the water facility, to find out have our monies been used efficiently in the recent years. Some people in staff have alluded to the fact that much has gotten done. Yet, like I said, just what I alluded to and what Bob has alluded to, a lot hasn't been done. And this is a concern. But, before we can give the community adequate cause for us having a rate increase, we need to show, why it is that we have these problems now. Why is it that they haven't been addressed in the past, so they can have confidence that, well, we're going to kind of redo the situation now, and we're going to do things properly in the future. It sounds like I'm just kind of babbling on, but that's my concern. I'd really like to know, like I said, how the monies from the current rate increase have been used to make improvements at water and wastewater. And let me just, I'll just leave it at that for right now.
Can I just, I'll hand it right to you, but I just want a few brief comments. I can probably show you a CIP sheet from over 10 years ago that said we should have a influence screen at the wastewater treatment plant. It's nothing new. I mean, we've been fighting for influence screens since I got here, so that's been a while now. And you might have talked to other boards in the past about the decisions that were made, but we as staff, you all direct the general manager, he directs staff, and that's basically my quick answer. But I want to hand the mic to General Manager Gruber here for a second. Let him elaborate.
What Director Farmer is touching on is the what have we spent the money on? So the last infrastructure the last rate committee was comprised of President Rice and Director Behringer. And when Alex Handler brought that proposed rates forward, it was determined, well, for whatever reason, to raise the wastewater rates very, very minimal. So it's not like the last increase represented a significant amount of money as it relates to additional revenues being generated for the CIP list. So that's the first thing. So I guess it's kind of a rhetorical question. Where'd the money go? Well, there wasn't a whole lot of money derived from the last rate increase for wastewater to get these projects done. And so what was adopted was an incremental increase. If we go back, and I wish I had the figures with me, I apologize, an incremental increase to address some of the immediate concerns. But again, the last increase for the wastewater rates was insufficient, woefully insufficient. So that's a policy decision. We had concerns that if we were too aggressive, and rightfully so, just like we do now, if we were too aggressive, then that process would be rejected by the community. That's always a concern of an elected board, and rightfully so. That's the story, essentially. That there wasn't really significant increases to really support what needs to be done. Now, as Alex has told the board over the last 4 or 5 years, you have consumer price index or consumer, you have inflationary measures, and you can Google it, and sometimes it's 2.3, but that's not relevant to the cost of operating a water and sewer system, because there's so many variables. There's labor costs, there's electrical costs, there's all these. So as Alex has always told the board, that you're looking at a 4 to 5% annual increase to be able to operate your water and wastewater systems. Now, a lot of that is derived from regulatory and environmental compliance. We're in one of the most environmentally sensitive areas, and it's never going to be less, it's always going to be more. So the requirements put on this district to maintain our facilities in compliance with the regulations is always going to be more. So those are just some things I wanted to talk about. There is no smoking gun. I don't know what to tell you. There is no conspiracy that continues to rear its ugly head through subtle that's not the case.
Okay.
The case is we have not chose to raise rates over a significant period of time. Yes, I agree. We as staff can do a better job in reducing some of our costs. But the bottom line is, historically, this district has not raised rates enough to meet.
But that wasn't the question, Harry.
But anyway.
To me, it's not about raising rates being the problem. It's the fact that the monies haven't been spent wisely. I mean, we spent $1.6 million in the calendar year of 2017 on a facility that isn't running. And I don't care if people say, well, we have money here, so we can't use it there.
I understand.
We could have borrowed money from the general fund to install the influence screen as soon as it arrived. We should have had that influence screen in there a long time ago. I mean, as Bob just said, it's been on the CIP list for 10 years. And John Alchin said, we've lost motors, we've lost pumps because of the fact that we don't have an influence screen. As I brought up before, John Rocky from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. At all the plants that he's ever looked at, he's never seen one that didn't have an influence screen. So I know I'm just kind of ragging on it here. It's not getting much accomplished, but it's so damn frustrating to know that a major part of a wastewater plant hasn't been even present at the wastewater plant. And I don't care. I don't want to hear any more mumbo jumbo. I mean, we just want to know why the heck isn't something that is like mandatory at a wastewater facility? Why hasn't it been there? I mean, we obviously have other priorities, but this is a major priority. Can we operate without the emergency water facility? Absolutely. Can we operate without a wastewater plant? Absolutely not. And it should be running as efficiently as possible. And like I said, I'd like to see a list of the past 5 years of what has been done. Because when I see all these things that John Alchin tells us about, it's damn frustrating that these things haven't been addressed. And Vice President Behringer and I, we don't agree on a lot of things. But one thing we do know, we sat in a number of meetings since he and I have been on the infrastructure board, and all we did was talk, and nothing got accomplished. Is that on us? I guess so. I'm a new member of the board, not so much anymore. But I feel like what little I have, I feel like pulling my hair out. Because if we're going to approve a rate increase, I don't know how I can't get beyond the frustration that I'm feeling. How can I expect the people that are going to be spending their money get beyond the frustration that they're feeling? And I'm just talking about a few things at the wastewater plant.
It is frustrating. One of the most frustrating things that I've had to deal with too is, that plant was built in 1990, and at that point in time, we could have put some things in place. We did, and it's hindsight. I like to look forward as we move forward.
Well, that's cool. Let's look. You know what?
Yeah.
When we had the economic collapse, let's look forward. Let's not blame anybody.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
not
let me-
about to.
let me
I don't
finish.
wanna- I don't want to blame anybody,
May I
except
finish?
I would like to know
Yeah.
why
Okay, well, let me
we haven't
finish.
installed an influence screen. I mean, it's just one item, but it's an example of things not getting
Okay.
done properly.
So 27 years ago, we built that plant, 28 years ago. And we've had 100 horsepower motors running continuously for 28 years. Our annual cost is about $1.5 million in electricity. If we would have spent the money back then, in 1990, 28 years ago, to put some kind of motor controls, whether it's VFDs or something, we would have saved probably $500,000 for the last 28 years, which comes to $14 million just in electricity. So I'm absolutely on board with you. $14 million in 28 years on electrical costs, because at that time, it was, quote, too expensive. We couldn't afford to do it. The same with the influence screen. The influence screen, when that plant was built in 1990, the decision was made for whatever reason, by whatever board, that we couldn't afford to do it. And look at the costs associated with it since that decision in 1990. So moving forward, I would just say, let's do what we got to do to resolve these things. So,
Well, the bids are going to be open on the 19th.
18th,
So,
yes.
18th. So let's move forward with that.
Absolutely.
Let's ensure that that is a high priority.
And also, too, I just, and really quick, while I get the microphone, and I don't do it anymore because I was asked not to do it because it took too much time, and I think I'm going to start doing it again, is every month I showed infrastructure improvements that we were making, and they were significant. And if you think about the things that have been accomplished with the available revenues that we have, completely rebuilt the Filtronics plant. When we were in the worst drought in California history, completely rebuilt that, brought it back online. Completely rebuilt SR4. It's completely automated now, new filter media, major water source, completely rebuilt. Replaced the Fiscalini tank. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And if you look at our budget for the wastewater plant right now, it looks like we're going to finish the year probably with a little bit of surplus. So what we've done through preventive maintenance is stop the hemorrhaging. And so we've done a lot with what we have. So I agree with Harry on a lot of things. So
Harry, we'll get back to you if you can. I know that the vice chair has wanted to put something out before she forgets.
If I haven't lost my train of thought here. Okay, I have three things. It's in the water department, but since Mike brought it up, we did talk about the subzone meters, and I believe that our engineer said that if those subzone meters had been in place when we had the leak behind the Bluebird, we would have been 80% more likely to have found the leak sooner. So we did ask for that to become a priority one on the water list, but I don't know if it ever got changed from a 2 to a 1. I see it's still pushed off a little bit. It did? Okay. Where was I here? Okay, on the 20%, yeah, I know I'm just, on the 20% cleaning and inspection of the collection lines, that was done, what, in 2013? Was that the only time we've done that?
Yeah, that's correct. We adopted a sewer system management plan in 2012, and we did the first 20%, and we never did anything beyond that. We did a lot of repairs that were discovered after that 20% TE
That was my
done.
next question. How bad was the situation, what you found in that first 20%?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was cleaned and inspected. There were a number of point repairs needed. I think there was one area where we had a culvert crossing right over a sewer where we think there might have been a direct connection between a storm drain and the sanitary sewer. So you find some significant sources of inflow and infiltration that you focus on first. We found some sewer in another street that had drastically been busted up, probably from poor installation or heavy vehicle on top of it of some kind, that we replaced a couple hundred feet of sewer. So there was a number of repairs that followed that inspection. So generally in the CIP, I put down, you TV inspect it, you have some little bit of engineering afterwards, identify which are the ones you want to focus on, and then you have the repair work after that. So every year you have kind of 3 steps to it.
So none of this has been done other than that first for the last 5 years. So we have no idea what condition the rest of our sewer lines are in and what kind of problems we're going to find. So this to me is kind of an important thing that we need to do, because after having personally experienced a septic system backing up into my house in our previous home, I don't want to see our sewer system back up or have a, clogged up or have a problem or a sanitary sewer overflow because we haven't inspected these pipes.
And we don't either, and we don't want to be paying fines on something. We'd be rather putting the cost into the repairs and the inspections, because we will get fined. We got substantially fined in 2011. We had a major overflow back then. So we want to make sure that this gets funded, and that's part of the risk that's with not doing these projects that occur.
Okay, and then back to the influence screen. Okay, so we have the money in place for the first half of the fiscal year to put the influence screen in, and we have been guaranteed it is not going to get kicked down the road any further, correct?
Well, there's no such thing as a 100% guarantee. I mean, I'm waiting for the bids to come in on Wednesday, the 18th, to see where they come in. I'm hoping they're close to the $150,000 budget that we put in there. We tried our best to cut the cost out of what was originally bid. We did that in-house, just put on our thinking caps and worked our best to make it a simpler project to install. And I got a few positive comments out of some of the contractors that have seen it. They're saying, hey, you made this pretty straightforward. I go, yeah, we sure tried. I hope that the cost and the bids indicate that, but I can't guarantee it. I won't know until the 18th, where those costs are going to come in. And I would add, too, that, I've been trying like crazy to get that thing, and we hit a funding shortfall in 2014 after we had to go scramble to get that grant for the Prop 84. There was a lot of work to get that grant, like a groundwater management plan, other things that had to happen to get that $4.2 million in the door. So we were working hard to try to get the financing in place the best we could through getting a grant to pay for part of that SWF. But it is what it is, and we just need to move forward. And the other thing, too, is it's got grinders in there. Operators hate grinders, but it was designed so that there were inline grinders that came on when the pump started to feed that water. And the problem with the grinders is they reform into rags and they settle into tanks and cause all sorts of problems. That wasn't an unusual practice back in the day, and that part of the plant was designed in 1980. So that is it's a remnant of old plant design, and people have gotten away from that since then.
Okay.
Go ahead.
To add on to something Harry said, which probably won't make people happy, but and it's something that was kind of a sore issue with me when it came up. But Harry mentioned that why couldn't we have borrowed the money from the general fund to have put this in, since we're burning up pumps and all of that for this. And I asked the same question because we were talking about taking money out of the general fund to buy the library building. Was that money available for that then? And why couldn't we have borrowed the money? If we could borrow the money for that, why couldn't we have borrowed the money to put in the influence screen?
Well, I'm going to defer that over to Jerry Gruber, because that is something that I have opinions on that they're just opinions.
I think it's a really good question. So the original bids came in well over $300,000 for the installation of that screen. And what we did is we could have went to the general fund, like Director Farmer said. But what we focused on is reducing the installation cost and modifying those plans so it comes in about $150,000. Because we rejected all the bids when it came in at over $300,000. Also, too, part of my job is to really safeguard what we have left in general funds, reserves. We've gone back historically to that well. For the wastewater department, you can see at one time we borrowed over $400,000, as was indicated earlier. So what we really need to do is have a rate structure that supports those departments so we do not have to go to the general fund. The general fund is something that we should do our best to safeguard. I think our policy is 35% of our overall budget. So we really need to bring our general fund reserves up to an acceptable level. And for several years, because of our rate structure wasn't adequate, we continue to go back to the reserves. We really want to safeguard that for a catastrophic failure, of some kind.
Karen, are you done? I have one. Ed was next, and then I can get back to
Well,
Harry.
I don't think you totally answered my question, because we were willing to borrow from the general fund to buy a new building, which was a want and not a need.
Right, and that was a policy decision, and staff.
This
Yeah.
thing is a need.
Yeah, absolutely. We agree with you on that.
Okay.
We agree with you on that.
Ted had a question, then we'll get back to Harry.
I guess this is actually a little more of a comment than a question. Going back to the discussion about meters and the relative benefit of subzone meters versus the residential meter replacements. The effects of those things are two completely different effects. And so there isn't any kind of equivalency. The effect of placing subzone meters would be to identify leaks, use less water, and therefore reduce some operating costs, I would hope. The residential meters, replacing those won't change by a drop the amount of water that's actually used. It will only change the amount of water that's accounted for, and accounted for in the form of revenues. And it's as we're judging the different projects, I think it's important to keep track of what the effects are. And this is something that actually is a more general comment, that the capital budget yields results, and those results should translate to something that ratepayers actually can understand and put their fingers on. And so if there's any way of kind of categorizing purposes in terms of how these budgets are put together, so that operational efficiency is a category, and revenue enhancement is a category, and then as these projects are completed, we should be able to start measuring what the impacts are.
That's a very good point, and I think too, it's becoming more of a regulatory issue too, because it's related to your water loss, and we now are required as a water agency to report every year on your percent water loss in your system, for example. We do it every 2 months, and that's something that is now becoming a requirement. If you go after grant money, people are going to look, did you do your water loss? Did you get a certified audit done on the loss of your water? And again, to me, we were talking sidebar earlier about continuous improvement. To me, the district just is on this continuous improvement track with these two committees. And, our water loss has to be, we have to go after it. We have to keep going after it and tightening up the system. And I think our fairly small water department does a great job. They're on the leaks, and they have their hands full. But that's part of getting the information to them, giving the tools they need to do their jobs. And, you're going to see more and more happen in the state of California. I mean, there's another recent law I think takes place in 2020. I can't remember the number of it, but there's definitely a big focus on those performance parameters. Where is your district at compared to everybody else? Personally, I think they're going to have to adopt the European system for water loss, but that's too technical to get into right now. But we do this gross percent water loss on our system.
Thank you, Ted. Amanda, and then back to Harry.
Two clarifications I want to make. The cost of providing water and sewer services on the coast is higher, partially because we're on the coast and the sensitive environment we're in, but also the regulatory agencies have made changes, not just for us, but for everybody, that means that we're testing for more constituents, we're required to track more things, like you were saying with the water loss, and all of those things increase our expenses. It's not just about the infrastructure maintenance and replacement. And the other thing that I wanted to say is I want to make sure that it's clear. The $466,000 that came from the general fund to cover wastewater, that was not a planned loan. That was money that was already spent that we had to cover at the end of the budget year when we were in the red. So I just want to make that entirely clear. The board has not set a policy about how we're going to pay that back, whether it'll be with interest or over how long a period of time. And I'm hoping we get to that soon, because we can't continue to do it like this. I think it is. I don't think I've ever heard that we've burned up pumps because the effluent screen wasn't installed. I think the fact that these section meters it sounds like that would help the department do the job for the water loss and various other things that would probably be helpful. I think that you're right about the collection system being videoed and cleaned too. It's a helpful thing. I mean, I remember seeing a picture. The Regional Water Quality Control Board accidentally drilled one of their MTBE testing wells right through our sewer pipe, which is crazy. They should have known where the sewer pipe was. But, these things happen, but they happen accidentally unless we are doing the assessment of the current system. We don't know what needs to be done.
Thank you.
And for the Regional Water Quality Control Board, I don't think they drove that well. I think it was a consultant doing the monitoring of MTB
Let
at the
me
time.
be clear then.
So
It wasn't the board.
I don't want anybody at the Regional Board to think that we're accusing them of
It was a
drilling
well
through a sewer.
that was required by the Regional Board,
There you
put
go.
in by
Yep.
by the
All right.
Chevron
You just missed
to
it. Yep.
do the measurements.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I want to make sure I'm clear too.
Thank you,
for the
Amanda.
clarification.
And Director Farmer.
I imagine, can you repair that back there? No? Okay, I'll use this. If I babble on too long, somebody wave, all right? Nobody's waving yet. That's a good sign. Okay, cool. First off, before I forget, somebody just talked about the European system of water loss. In case nobody knows, the name of our restroom in the West Village is called the European Building. Well, for obvious reasons. It's a restroom. It's a European. Needed some levity here. Hey, just trying my best. Anyway, page 13, where it talks about annual water rate revenues. And of course, it's highlighted that for 3 years, we did generate a little bit of revenue from penalties and surcharges. I think if we're going to ask the ratepayers of this community to pony up for more money, we should probably also implement penalties and surcharges for people that don't seem to have the consideration for the rest of us, and they feel like, well, I can afford it, I'll use more water. If you're going to use more water, then you should pay the piper, and we can use those monies toward things that need to be taken care of at water and wastewater. That's just my humble opinion. On page 20, we're talking about new staff positions, and it says a utility manager. I believe we've decided not to do that. Is that correct? Okay, cool. And then on page 40, at the top of page 40, 40, correct. And it's talking about the operation of our water facility, and it says, assumes 2 months of, quote, SWF, unquote, operation per year starting 2019-20. I'd like to know why so I guess we're assuming that, but it might not happen. But I'm noticing here that for the next 3 years, total revenue is still going to be below total expenses for the facility that isn't running, and then we're supposed to catch up in 2020-21. But I don't think we have any kind of definite assurance that we're ever going to catch up with revenue being more, and the revenue, by the way, from the water facility is the bill that the ratepayers are being charged. It's not like it's generating some kind of income for us other than the ratepayers are being billed for something that isn't operating. I just kind of want to make that clear. Thank you.
What I'd like to do is assure the public that these two committees, the Finance Committee and the Infrastructure Committee, have been formed to spend the money wisely that we generate if we generate a rate increase. To continue to go on each individual item, we can do that each month from the Infrastructure Committee. The Finance Committee is going to be watching how the things are going to be spent. So with that, I think we can turn it back over to the Finance Committee. I think that's the next item on the agenda, where we're going to talk about review the rate study, alternative B, and what your recommendations might be.
Yeah, I think Harry got a little bit ahead of us and stuff, but that's okay. What I was going to suggest is that we go through, if anybody has any questions anywhere, okay, including the people in the audience, on scenario B, which is the one that was first presented to us, and the one which at our last board meeting, I think most of the board members were in agreement that that would be the scenario that would make the most sense and that we would be going forward with tomorrow if we do go forward with it. Okay? So I'd like to just concentrate on that one and see if there are any questions. If you look at pages, I think it's 29, 40, and 59, those are the pages that kind of start to delineate exactly what, besides the CIP, okay, the general manager and staff have put in, okay, for justifying the rates that we're talking about, okay? So if you have any questions on what's on page 25, 40, or 59, all right, now's the time to kind of point those out and kind of ask them. And Amanda has her hand up already. So.
Yeah, this is something that has been partially because I'm an English major. The allocated overhead in the water and wastewater departments are significant. The water department for budget year 17-18, it was $909,000 and $348. So and then wastewater was $461 and $98. It's in B under the allocated overhead on page 59. Right? Yeah, that's it. It's called admin overhead. It's on page 25. Thank you, Mike. Oh, okay, yeah, I'm looking at the wastewater. Yeah, that's, the water is on, thank you, Mike, on 25 and the wastewater. I'm sorry, I have it on, I had to consolidate the numbers in one place so I could see what I was looking at. So sorry, I'm looking at something on my screen here. Prior year, 16-17, water department overhead was $582,000.
What page are we on, President?
That's from the budget document that we had, and I'm sorry it's not in this document, but what I'm trying to get a handle on, because I was trying to figure out, almost $1 million in the water department and $500,000 in the wastewater department. I'm sure that can all be justified, but the one of the things about the big jump from prior years had to do with the fact that the board made a policy that we were not going to allocate any property taxes to the admin department, that the admin department would be funded almost entirely from overhead, meaning it would be charged to the different departments, that's a decision that we made. And when we did the budget year with Patrick still here of 1718, we went through kind of what the policy should be, how it should be divided out. Now, the fire department allocated overhead is about $300,000. And it was about it was about 213 the year before. So we took away $300,000 out of the property taxes from the admin department. That money probably went to the fire department or parks, because that's what general fund is meant to be for. But the allocated overhead didn't go up for fire to kind of replace some of those property taxes. I'm just thinking that the allocated overhead is kind of out of whack.
Do you have the document you're referring to? Because we don't have the document you're referring to, do we?
I'm talking about the budget.
But if we could, again, as I indicated in an earlier email to you, if we could have these documents, it would be really helpful, because we're not prepared to answer the questions right now.
And I didn't expect that there would be an answer.
Well, I think you did. I think you did.
I actually was expecting, Mr. Gruber, I was actually expecting to be able to finish my comment.
Okay, but I don't know where you're going with this.
That's right.
Okay, go ahead.
I think that having the Finance Committee consider how the allocated overhead is broken out is important, because if the allocated overhead is broken out with, say, 10% to fire, 80% to water, 10% to sewer, that might be out of whack. It might not be. It might be the case that the general manager and staff in the admin department provide that much support to water department, and that's appropriate. But having $900,000 in allocated overhead in the budget, and that's what it indicates here in the rate study, having that makes a difference in the amount of the rates. And so do we put that burden that high on water when we already had taken away some of the property taxes that had been allocated to, that had been put to the budget for admin on purpose, so that we wouldn't have to do the allocated overhead entirely out of the enterprise funds? It's a concern to me, and it's one of the ways we could possibly look at these rates being slightly lowered, is if we change, or at least take a look at how the allocated overhead is distributed. Because I think that I'm not even looking at whether the expenses are justified or not, whether the correct amounts are being charged. Let's at least look at whether or not that 900,000 is the right number for the allocated overhead. And that is on page 25 in the document that we are working with here in the binder. So,
and no matter how, and it's a very good point, President Rice, a very good point. But no matter how it's allocated, the revenue needs to come from somewhere.
Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah, the admin is just
agree.
the admin is just the hub of the spokes, of the hub of the wheel.
I'm not saying that we take money away from admin. Okay. I'm trying to say let's make sure that we're taking it from the right place.
Absolutely.
I would agree with that as part of the expenditures between now and next year, as the Finance Committee looks at to study the allocated overhead and see how it's best applied.
It is on our agenda as a future item to look at the formula that the staff came up with as far as how they were allocating all of that.
Right.
Okay, and one of the things that they did was they took the allocation from the SWF and put it into the water.
Right. But as far as this rate study and the pages that we're looking at and the way it's structured, the way Alex Handler has presented it since the 24th of May, and as we agreed that would be the study that we work on, I do have one person commented about what Alex did, I believe, is he made essentially the SWF charge throughout the entire year, so that during the years that we don't run it, we build a little bit of reserves. And there is some people think, well, if we ran it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 months, the cost would be astronomical. And I believe discussed it last time, is that if we went into a stage 3 emergency, we would then apply surcharges to help cover that cost. So it'd be, if we don't use it, we're building up a little reserve. When we use it, the way we get the money for that would be surcharges. So, and so
Understood.
So I'm comfortable with the 218 as it stands or tomorrow. My recommendation is that we move forward with a Prop 218 as described.
I want to see if there's any other comments on any of the other
Please.
items that are on the pages 25, 40, and 59 as you go through those.
I would like to just give credit to the infrastructure committee member sitting right next to me who has the 18-19 preliminary budget, which is where I got those numbers. So if you want to see them, Mr. Gruber, they're in the preliminary 18-19 budget.
Okay.
And Mr. Lyons has a copy here if you need it.
Mr. Howell, did you have a question? Or please do.
Yeah, come on up.
There we are.
Yeah, okay.
Page 38 of the packet here shows some approximately, here we are, over $2 million for potential treatment facilities to start in 2022. But I'm not clear. I'd just like a clarification as to what those $2 million worth of potential treatment facilities are. Let me finish the questions and I'll shut up. So that's one question. The other, which is perhaps a little more general, is in view, particularly if you actually do pass these draconian rate increases, and I have some suggestions about that, but assuming for a moment that the board tomorrow does pass these rate increases, and assuming that the Prop 28 fails, it's highly likely that many people who are already at the edge and spending all of their, and I've talked to many people, there's a large number of retired people here in this community who are living on their Social Security, and that's about it. So the only way they're going to be able to deal with these, and also large families, the only way they're going to be able to deal with a draconian rate increase such as is being proposed is they're going to cut their water usage way down. So the question I have is the sewer system, the collection system, at what point does it not get the flow? I mean, what amount of flow does it need in order to keep the pipes clear? I mean, sewers that are it's a gravity system, so it relies on a certain slope and a certain volume of water. Is it possible that under massive conservation, are we going to have some problems in keeping the collection system clear? So it's just something to think about. And so those are my two questions. And I'll come back for the what I have on this.
Mr. Howell, I just want to make sure I understand your first question. Were you talking about the wastewater treatment plant projects? Okay. Sorry, let me see. Let me look at that. Okay. So, SWF. Okay. Yeah, okay. So that's a future project. That's a distant future project where we put in to improve reliability. I'll kind of circle for a landing if you'll bear with me. Our system right now, we can't run well SS3 when there's flow in the creek because it's within 150 feet of the creek. So this surface water treatment rule that went into effect, I think, in the 90s. There's times when you can be down to one pump because of that surface treatment rule. So we thought, okay, if we're going to change this impoundment to where we're no longer using it to store the RO concentrate, let's take advantage of that pond that's sitting there and store water, take water during the winter months and pump it into that pond and maybe pick up another 20 acre feet to use during the month of August. So it's just to recoup that potentially lost investment. And so The surface water treatment plan is required for a couple reasons if you do that. One, for treating water from SS3, so you're not limited to when you can use SS3, you can use it year-round. And if you put water in the surface water, in the impoundment, and you then create it as surface water, so you have to have surface water treatment. There's a whole economic thing that could go into design when you get to that point about whether to cover it and keep it as groundwater or use it as surface. There's a little economic work to be done in preliminary engineering on that. We pushed those way back out in the future. We didn't think it was that critical of a need, but it seemed to make sense, and we have it listed as a proposed modification in the SEIR for that reason. So every time you get a chance to improve reliability of the water supply, as staff, we try to work that into the planning. It's long-term. It could change. I mean, it could go away. I don't think Alex put that in the rate, if I remember. He did not include that in the rate for the SWS. He just kind of parked it. He recognized it and just said, okay, it's kind of a parking lot item. So that's question one, I believe. Now, remind me on question two, since okay, yes. And that is a very valid point. I've gotten calls from other agencies that have had issues because of conservation on their collection system. And as a rule of thumb in engineering, you want to be above 2 feet per second in your velocity in the sewer. So you can adjust the slope and you can do things like that. The flatter areas of town with the larger trunk sewers, that's where we focus that first 20% on. So we tried to clean the areas that do flow at a lower rate. And it does cause problems, and it is an issue. And it's one of the reasons we need that Vector truck so badly, because that's going to be part of the cleaning process, was with that Vector truck to jet those sewers out. Because when people do a great job of conservation, it does create problems in the collection system. So yeah, it's I don't know if is that enough of an answer? Okay, thank you.
Can I resume with more to the topic?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just wanted to get those in. I notice on the rate studies, and I think you're looking at page 25, right? At any rate, I don't think I need it in front of me. One thing I notice in all of the studies, it projects 0% growth of residential connections.
That's true.
Yes.
What we asked them to do is to ignore that.
But what that raises is then the issue which I brought forth earlier, which is the SEIR claims that the so-called sustainable water facility is to be used to support additional 600 and something connections. So either it is or it isn't. If we're going on a rate study which says there are not going to be any connections, that raises, that says that there's certain resources available to the community or to the board and to the CCSD, whereas if the wait list is to be opened as a result of this so-called sustainable facility, then that would change the entire picture, because then you will have additional fees to collect. The whole budget looks in an entirely different way. So again, I ask the question, and this is maybe not the right forum, but I think it's important to get it out there, is what is the intention? How is this truly so-called sustainable facility to be used? Because otherwise it invalidates to some degree the rate study, because it's based upon what would then be an incorrect assumption. So
okay, yeah. The current board, is not making a decision on issuing more meters. We're in the process of trying to get the regular permit. And that's going to take, we think, at least another 18 months, maybe 2 years. And then after that, we have to go to the county and ask them to go, because currently we're at a 0% increase in population, right? So we've got to go through all these steps. And we don't, the current board doesn't think that that's going to happen for at least 3 years, that we would be issuing new meters,
Mm-hmm.
2 years at the earliest, 3 years probably. That's one of the reasons why I think at 3 years we need to look at rates again, because at that time maybe we would be in the position where we would start talking about whether we're going to do that or not, And at that point, you may have an entirely different board. So this board doesn't want to tie the hands of that board as far as what they're going to do and not do. Okay? Our decision has been to go ahead and get the regular permit, and then once we get that, then we'll make a decision moving forward.
Right.
Am I speaking truth here?
No, I think that's,
good.
we haven't had the discussion yet about
No.
whether we have new meters.
Right, and as it is, oh, good.
Microphone. Microphone. We want to hear you.
Push the button. I think the other piece to that, Don, is that we've had some conversation about risk and risk mitigation and all of those kinds of things. And if you want to really look at it in a very broad context, the fact that that hasn't been factored in wouldn't be creating a risk. It would be creating an opportunity, because there would be the potential for additional revenue resource that would be coming in that wouldn't necessarily have been planned. But it isn't a risk, it's an opportunity.
Yeah, I do see that. I guess, though, my only response would be, if you're looking at a possible reconsideration in 3 years, then maybe the rate increase should only be for 3 years, and then it comes back. I guess I don't, public agencies in general.
I think we need to make that policy,
Yeah.
is that every 3 years we look at rates. And my recommendation is that we do that, and that should be part of our budgeting policy, is that every 3 years we look at the rates again, we look at what our income is, we look at what our expenses are, and hopefully make an adjustment in the right way.
That makes sense to me. If I can just go one step further, and then I'll keep quiet for the rest of the discussion. Personally, I feel that I don't see any problem with the sewer increase. It's clearly needed, no matter what people might think. There is really no choice, as I think it was mentioned earlier. If you can't, you can drink water. You have drinking water, that's fine. But if you can't flush your toilet, you got to move. We can't have a community without a sewer. So there may have been incorrect decisions in the past. There may have been mismanagement. There may have been a misplaced set of priorities in former boards. Nevertheless, this is where we are. However, in terms of the water rate, and in terms of including the so-called SWF in this particular rate increase, my recommendation to the board and to you guys would be to consider splitting off the sewer thing, going with that, and spending more time and giving these committees more chance to work before you deal with the water rates. So that is just my own suggestion. There's no reason why you can't do that, because the rate study clearly separates the two areas. So you could put it forth to the public in that way. Thanks.
Mr. Howell, thanks for your comments. I would only say that when you're looking at the water proposals, those things are really money-saving projects, especially those where we'd be replacing the meters individually and perhaps taking advantage of some new telemetry or something that Mr. Gressland was talking about. And also the subzone metering that we talked about, not only it could save a great deal of water. So I don't think that those should be eliminated from your suggestion. I would ask you to open up the possibility of at least those two projects, the water and wastewater. One other thing we didn't talk about was the software upgrades that we had discussed during that June 13th meeting, which could also save a lot of water. So there are some very positive effects of funding these water projects as well.
You have a comment? Yes.
I'd just like to say sorry for being so quiet during this whole time. This is the first time I've heard a lot of this information being presented at the same time, and I'm just trying to soak it in. But I do want to comment on what Mr. Howell and then a restatement by Ms. Steidel over there regarding the potential growth, if and when, and the opportunity that we have with it. And some people have been saying that we could use the connection fees to offset rate structures. Well, we have approximately 665 connections that we could sell currently on the wait list. If we use those to subsidize our rate structure downward, we're really wasting an opportunity to build up a nice fund that we could set aside for a rainy day. If something drastic were to happen at the water waste treatment plant, we could save anywhere from $16 to $23 million, depending on the connection fee, $25,000 to $35,000 per connection, over a 20 to 30 year period, which would give us a nice nest egg. So we almost need to see that the wait list as an opportunity for the community to build a nice nest egg for ourselves. And then when we get to a point somewhere down the line, as Mr. Pearson said, every 3 years, we can, hey, we're getting better, more in the reserves, and we can start bringing our rates down and adjusting them downward. So I think we need to look at that opportunity as well, if and when the wait list ever does get opened up. And that's not really up to us. That's up to the county saying, here's your 1%, your 0.5%, your 1.5%, or whatever the percentage growth they deem we could sustain.
Good, thank you. Dwayne, did you have a comment?
Yes, I'd just like to say this. It's going to be up, I think, to Mother Nature as to when the water wait list gets opened up. When we have adequate supply of water, we can have growth. I don't think there's anybody that I've talked to that is against growth. It's the matter of having the sufficient water to supply that growth. And the county is going to come and make that determination through the GMO. And when that happens, then, we can issue additional meters. So whether it's operating the plant, which, you heard Mr. Flores when he made his presentation saying that that particular plant is not going to give us an additional water supply, so to get additional growth from that is going to be pretty difficult. So, I've kind of got that in the back of my mind as far as that, but if we have adequate well levels throughout a sustainable period, we will have growth. So I don't know how we can have anything to say about when that's going to happen. We all want to. As far as the infrastructure needs and the rates that we're looking at now, it's kind of like preaching to the choir. There isn't a single item on the infrastructure want list that I don't want to say, okay, let's go with it. But what I don't want to see happen is that we get so aggressive on this after the last rate increase. And I remember the same consulting firm telling us, that if we have a cost of living increase periodically for the next 3 or 4 years, on that we will not have to be coming back to you for rate increases every other year, like what's going to happen. And here we are. We're not even through the rate increases that were already built into the last rate increase that we're asking the public to say, we need some more money. Well, we do. That was the reason for my statement at the very beginning. I think we need to show that we can save some money, and I don't know about being so aggressive. I see the need, and I'm all for satisfying that need. But what I would really hate to see happen is that we put this out and we get such a backlash from the community because of inaffordability, or they don't agree with the way we're currently spending. We don't agree with the way money is currently being spent, that this gets rejected. And then all this work is for naught. And the staff has spent an enormous amount of time, the board has spent an enormous amount of time, and we've worked a little bit on it. So, I would just like to say it's we want to be aggressive, but let's don't be so aggressive that we get the whole thing defeated.
Can I go back one? Because I don't think I heard an answer from committee members of either committee on the issue of looking at allocated overhead and the effect that it may have on these rates. I know we're going to be looking at it in the future, but that doesn't mean that it's going to change what these rates are. So if the Finance Committee has looked at it and feels okay with the way that it's portrayed in the rates study, then I'm okay going forward. I'm personally uneasy, and I'm just looking for some reassurance from those of us who've also kind of taken a bigger look at it. I don't know if anybody.
I don't think we have
committee
looked at the formula or anything yet. Okay, and we
Okay.
did have a question about why all of the monies for the SWF went into the water fund. Okay.
Mhm.
We will be able to look at that.
Uh-huh.
And one of the clarifications I want to make is that if the full board approves the 218 tomorrow to have it sent out,
Mhm.
those are the maximum rates that we would be passing sometime in September. Okay, or I guess in very late August at this point, right? We could make adjustments down from those. We could not make adjustments up. So if we wanted to keep the wastewater where they were, but lower the water because of this 900 being reduced to 700 or something like that, we could do that, okay, at that time. I've got are you okay with that? Or
I just am hesitant on we could reduce it, because the last time that we did these where we had the 4% increase, my understanding was different than what has happened, which is I thought it was supposed to come back to the board for approval each time they went up the extra 4%. And that's since I've now understand that that's not the case. We need to probably put something specifically in that, because it could be an entirely different board. I think we need to put something in that says, if this policy gets changed, the way they allocated it, then the board needs to relook at the rates. I mean, something that just reassures the public that we're not going to just go, right, we're just going to say this right now, and then even though we have fully intention to do it, let's do something that
would be part of
binds
the
us to
resolution
doing it.
tomorrow? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
that
would help me.
Maybe I can add to that, because on the last rate study that we did, and the last rate increase we did, we had this inflation 4% in there. And of course, this rate would obviate that, because the new rate structure is the new rate structure. So there's not going to be another 4% next year. And I think that I would recommend, I can do it tomorrow, or it could be a recommendation that comes from today, that the annual increases need to be approved by the board each year, and they are not automatic. And that was our assumption last time, and it wasn't. It wasn't in the Prop 218 notice. So my suggestion or recommendation is that if we approve this Plan B, we do so with additional language that says that the annual escalator is justified annually by the board.
So the board would be voting sometime like in May of next year to approve the July increase that is currently proposed.
Yes, yeah, whatever the language is. And if that was in the Prop 218 notice, I am comfortable.
So that needs to be a recommendation from us today to the board tomorrow.
That would be my recommendation from us for the board tomorrow.
I agree. I would agree with that. Any objections to that one? No.
Okay.
Did you get that, Mr.
We've got some more.
Yes. Laura, you're next.
Hello, everybody. You have more bureaucrats here than we have people. Sorry. Well, I know. With all due respect, guys. Okay, the thing is, I've been sitting there quietly, and there's just a couple of things. But first of all, very respectfully to Mr. Wharton, the thing is, you're not going to be getting 15 or 16 million if you start putting on more connections, because there's a thing called the build-out reduction plan that I sat with my colleagues here for a year and a half, and it came up that it's going to cost the community and it's mandated in the EIR as we speak, that it's going to cost the community $25 million, maybe $30 million for the build-out reduction plan that is mandated in the EIR. So any money that you're going to make putting on more houses is going to go to the build-out reduction plan. Again, a year and a half of our lives. The other thing about the allocated overhead, I had asked a couple of times to understand that a little bit better, because if the EWS's allocated overhead is in the water department, we're not knowing what the EWS is costing us. And I believe that the community needs to know every dime that has gone into that to make sure that we make good decisions if we want to continue with that. Because we never voted for a sustainable. We voted for an EWS. And I've got the permit right there. And I mean, it's never been decided in public that we were going to go ahead that way. So we need to know how much we have paid for this plant. Not saying it's bad or good, but how much have we paid so that we make good decisions from now on? I'll try to sit quietly again.
Ted, like to say.
Okay. I am sorry to contradict, but I do know something about the build-out reduction plan, too. And one of the things that we could not tap into is connection fees. So what Mr. Wharton had said actually is correct. If the connection fees are on the order of $20 million or $20,000 per new connection allocated between water and wastewater, that would be money that could be set aside in those two funds for purposes of the water fund and for purposes of the wastewater fund. The purchase of properties has to come from other sources. And our report actually recommended a parcel tax or something akin to that. Another fee placed on the people who develop, which would not be a connection fee, it would be a fee specifically for the purpose of purchasing undeveloped property, and a fee on tourism. So that's just a clarification.
Thank you. Yes. Have we got a rebuttal to a rebuttal here? All right. Yes. Come on up, Laura.
I just made the statement that that amount of money was going to be placed onto the responsibility of the community. And I think that's true. The thing is, if we keep raising rates, we keep having more taxes, we keep doing this and that and the other thing, that extra money is going to have to come from this community. And we can't bleed anymore. I mean, it's just, I really feel until everything is really solved that we shouldn't be asking people for money until you really figure out and explain to us how it's going to be spent. And the thing is, if you keep doing it this way, you have to say no at some point, because if we don't say no, it's just going to accumulate and get worse. And if everybody lies down and says, fine, this is great, and not questioning, which it's what we're doing now, it'll just get worse the next time, because that's human nature. If you just sit there, they're going to sit on you some more. And I did say it was for the community. I didn't say just the rate connections. I said there's going to be more money coming out of the community to do this.
Right. It's the problem. The problem with saying that is that it does not take into account that the funds for water and for wastewater and for general funds are all separate. And yes, they are monies that would be coming to the community, but for specific purposes. And one of the things, it's a really big problem in terms of understanding in this community. I read letters to the Cambrian where people mix up funds and say, if we only did this, our fire department would, if we charged more for water, we could do more with our fire department. Well, no, you can't. It can't be done. The connection fees are already, they're published fees that are in place for new connections, and that's a very separate issue from the purchase of undeveloped property for the purpose of retirement. And so the funds for that have to come from somewhere else. Yes, they do come from the community in one way or another, but the purposes are quite distinct, and it makes it really troublesome to try to deal with something like what we're dealing with today, rate increases, when we have comments that confuse the purposes of these funds. And so I did feel it's necessary to react to that. Thank you.
Yes, Mr.
Dave, just quickly, and I know we have some more talk. First of all, it's almost 4 hours that we've been into this, but I don't know. Maybe I'm at a different meeting, but it seemed to me like there was a lot of discussion on control over the spending of the money that's coming through here. And I hope the community, if you're watching, has gotten the idea that it's going to be scrutinized quite specifically. And as far as the priority of what the money is spent on from an infrastructure perspective is an ongoing effort by these two committees. So I hope that the fear of how the money is being spent is alleviated a little bit. So that was my only comment. Yeah.
Dennis, his hand up for a while. Dennis.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions. The first one is stepping back a notch, back to the screen that you were talking about, the influence screen. Has there been an accounting of what the cost of not having put in that influence screen has been? I understand that we have a bid, or we rejected bids of about $300,000 to install hardware that we already own. Is that correct? What has it cost us to not spend that $300,000 or not to have spent it sooner?
Well,
by fixing pumps and whatever other downstream effects there have been that had to be repaired.
Well, I can't rattle it off exact, but I can tell you off the top of my head, I know I was involved in a repair maybe 3 years or so ago where we had to clean out the aeration basin, for example. Just one basin, I think it cost us around $30,000 to haul all the rags out of it that wrapped around the aerator headers. I mean, it was a total, and that's not including our own staff time. That was getting a specialty contractor to come in there and clean out that basin. We've had a bunch of pump problems. It's not uncommon to spend $10,000 on a single pump problem. I'd say we had at least a half dozen to a dozen pump problems related to the ragging. We have some hydraulic bottlenecks and pipelines between our grit tank and aeration basin. We still have to clean out that we've been holding off. That's probably at least a $20,000 job to get rid of those rags. So and then just labor and just wear and tear on our operating staff too. There's an intangible portion of the cost too.
So we don't have a firm cost of what it's been, but we have an estimate of it's been about what we could have paid to have installed it in the first place. It sounds to me like
Are you expecting
a rough guess
us to have specific numbers for this question?
Well,
are you expecting?
Could I clarify your question?
You're asking us for the money for that, so I'm just asking what.
Okay, I'm gonna pass.
What have we spent?
It's a very
by
good
not
question.
having invested the money.
So, just a point of clarification. I think it's a very good question. So we want to go to this technology but we've had this technology, and I think there is a little disconnect, and hopefully I can better clarify this. So the technology that was installed for that system when it was built, that facility, was the influent pipe coming in. There are two large gearboxes. Boy, each one of them are about the size of Director Wharton's table, about half that size. And we've taken those out and we've rebuilt those. And then what they are is they're just big gearboxes that just grind everything up, grind all the inorganics up. And I'll just let your imagination wander on that. The inorganics, not the organic matter. That was the technology at the time. And so when we built the plant, it's not like we didn't install anything. We installed these things. To take it a step farther, we went ahead and had both those completely rebuilt, so they're functioning to the best of their ability. The technology back then was to grind everything up, not remove it. And the problem associated with that is some of the things we're discussing here today. The pump problems, the lines being clogged, and everything like that. So to answer your question, yes, the money we've spent over a period of time could have paid the difference for that. But I also want to help the committees and the board understand that we do have something in place, which was the original design of the plant. It's just not the proper piece of equipment. So
I misunderstood then. My understanding was we had nothing in place and all the stuff is just flowing into the plant.
Right,
That's not the case.
They're called communutors, and they're big, huge, giant gearboxes, and it just grinds everything up. The problem with that is you're not removing the inorganics, and it's just working its way through the plant. And again, it was at that time probably the best design, although it's not a good design, and so you're forced to do the maintenance. I remember showing some pictures here. We've cleaned some of the aeration basins out. With this influence screen, it will remove all those inorganics. Now we still have the job of removing everything that's in the plant. So once we get this installed, we're still going to have to bring the aeration basins down, clean all the rags out that Bob's talking about, clean and jet that line coming from the influent part of the plant into the basins. We'll see immediate improvements right away because we won't deposit any more debris into the plant. But part of the CIP, as you can see, there are components of taking the system down individually, methodically, and removing all those things out of the system. So
basically, making that particular investment will pay for itself in a relatively short period of time by not having to replace pumps and shut systems down and clean them out as often. That sounds like what I'm hearing.
That's a good assessment.
So this leads me to my second question, which is, this is a process question, and forgive me if I just don't know the answer already, but I'm sure you folks do. Is there well, let me back up. In a manufacturing plant, where I used to be an engineer, or multiple manufacturing plants, we would go through periodic budgeting exercises, and during each of those, we would have a statement made to management, in this case the board, or to management from each of the departments as to what their needs and wish lists were for the subsequent period. Mm-hmm. And a case would be made for each of those line items. And I'm not educated as to what that process is in our district. So do we have somebody
now that we have
presenting?
Now that we have the finance committee, we basically did that with this year's budget.
Okay.
It took us 4 or 5 hours. 5 hours. We went through pretty much line by line, and there were things that the general manager and staff asked for that we told him he wasn't going to get, and so he revised his numbers and came back. It was our first time doing this, So we did a good job. I think next time we will do an even better job. But yes, this kind of thing
So it is being done now, maybe wasn't being done in the past.
I guarantee it wasn't being done in the past.
Okay, so that sounds like some
I
really,
think the general manager had a process where the department heads did come to him, and then, but I don't think it didn't come to the board until after it had been processed through. But correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right, Madam President. And I think to answer, to dovetail on what Director Pearson said, I think it's a process that has evolved, has continued to get better. I know when I first came on as general manager, there was a wish list put together, and it wasn't prioritized. It wasn't based on a capital improvement list. It was to the best of their ability, a list of things that they thought were important. But what's evolved over the years is a CIP list and a list that's based on, really the needs. For an example, Jason Buell, our water supervisor, came to Bob and I and said, I really need some equipment. I mean, I really need to have some equipment to be able to do my job in a more efficient and effective manner. And the budget this year reflects Jason's needs, but also the support that we can give him in getting him those tools to do his job. Unfortunately, what's happened over the last several years is we haven't been able to, as Director Farmer said, John Elchin has said, these are my needs, Jerry. I need this, I need this, I need this. When John provided his wish list to us, it resulted in about $1.2 million more in projected revenues than we had as far as the 18-19 budget. So I remember sitting with Bob in the office on the whiteboard. I have two big whiteboards, and really going through all that and being able to balance the budget. So we're just as frustrated as Director Farmer is and some of the committee members, and probably more so because one of the things we struggle with is staff turnover. And we need to be able to provide our staff with the best working environment, with the most modern equipment that we as a community can afford to pay for, the tools that they need and the resources they need. It's not just about salary, because it's a highly competitive market right now, and we want to be able to retain and hire and keep the most qualified people. And if they're struggling day in and day out to keep the system running with baling wire and bubble gum, as I've heard, although we've come a long way, what is the motivation? What is the incentive to keep them there? So I really appreciate all the work that the committees are doing and the board's doing and the community input, because my employees, our employees, not my employees, our employees are listening to this right now, I can tell you that, between their breaks, okay? They're listening to this, and they appreciate what you're doing, because, and Bob and I and Monique appreciate it too, because the staff really feel like the community cares about their needs out there. So
I think the community definitely cares, and I think that's why we have a team of volunteers over here who are overseeing what you should be doing as a professional manager. And I think that goes to speak to the quality of management we've had here for some time. I'd like to wrap up with one more question, and that is, have we included in a budget or thought about including in a budget a line item or two for interns coming from our amazing local universities out of the civil engineering schools?
Do we need a budget line for an intern?
I don't know
Aren't
how
they
you do
free?
it, but you were talking about where the money's allocated.
Yeah.
I think it would be awesome to get some young people.
I like it too.
I remember a couple of appointments ago, we sat and listened as to why we should have younger people on the board, because, we just can't get along any longer with white-haired Medicare recipients.
Hey, baby.
And so in that vein, or no-haired Medicare recipients, in that vein, I think we should be looking to the future for our people who will be able to build a system that's going to be here 50 and 100 years from now, and not just worried about breaking down. A system that's barely 30 years old that's already falling apart. And I think that would be well worth the money, and we can get it for a song.
Yeah, in fact, the general manager and I the other day were discussing if we want to do this asset management system, the best thing to do would be to get a intern in here from
Yes.
Cal Poly to help us do the inventory and to set up the,
Awesome.
because they're much better at software than I am, certainly. So,
Awesome. I think I put that in my vision statement a couple
I
of
think you
appointments
did.
ago. And then one last thing, which isn't a question, is I've looked all over California and all over the areas I've been to in the United States, and I have yet to see a community solve its funding problems by growing, by building more houses, by building more lots, by building more apartment buildings. I don't think that is a reliable revenue source to pull us out of our problems. Growth is a completely different issue, but I don't think it's something we should rely on to sustain our economic future. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave, our tradition is to have a 4-hour meeting,
yes.
and we did take a break, so we can take that out of there, but
And we started a little bit late.
can we conclude?
Yeah, I think we can conclude. That's what
I
I'm
just
aiming
have
for.
2 quick comments. Since we were talking about the grinder and the effluent screen, maybe this is a good time to remind the community they should only be flushing organics and regular toilet paper and not flushing other things, because that does cause a problem for our sewer plant.
Absolutely.
Like wipes
absolutely.
and cleaning
Yeah.
rags. I mean, that's one of the problems is people
it really-
flushing non-toilet paper toys. Things, I mean, goldfish, I don't know if goldfish count as organic, but
They are. Last time I looked, they were.
No, it's the inorganic.
I just wanted to take the opportunity because until I moved to a community where I actually knew there was a sewer, which I didn't realize in New Orleans. I mean, it just, you flush, it goes away. But I didn't realize that it does, what you do does really affect, especially in a community like ours, it makes a difference. Just want to bug one more time. If we change the overhead allocation in the water department, there's 0 in the SWF, so that affects the rates for the SWF also if we decide to put some of the allocated overhead to the rates. So it will change what the water and what the SWF, I mean, I just want to make that clear at this point. Thanks.
Yes. All right. So the one recommendation that we do have so far is that we're going to recommend to the full board that they put into the resolution that the rate increases in subsequent years will have to be approved by the board annually. Okay. Should we have a motion for that? I'll accept a motion for that if there's anybody.
So moved.
So moved, seconded.
I'll second.
Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Very good, unanimous.
Did you get the second, Ms. Madrid? Okay.
Is there?
No, who was the second?
Ted.
Ted
Ted
Ziegler was the second.
Harry was the only one who opposed.
He didn't pose.
I just raised my hand late.
I will ask a process question, though, related to both the motion and the vote. Are we voting as a combined 2 committees, or are we really 2 separate
Let's
committees
make
that have to vote separately?
Since we don't have the district council here, I'm not sure I can answer that question.
I'm not sure it's relevant in that. It's just a suggestion.
It's combined. I don't see a problem with that.
Because it's committee, it's advisory anyway, so but I think that it gives extra clarity to have a motion.
All right. Is there a motion to recommend that the board either go forward or not go forward with the rate increase?
I move that we go forward with option B as presented by Alex Handler and adjusted by the previous motion of board approval for annual adjustments.
That needs to be in the policies that we're going to work on.
Yeah, that would be a
Okay.
policy, and I don't think it should.
Yes.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second.
Seconded by Mr. Lyon.
All right. Oh, yes, sir.
I would like to see it stated for the record exactly what proposals that we're talking about recommending to the board as far as changing it, so that
Yeah, scenario B is what he said. Scenario B was the one that he is.
The original one presented by Alexander on May 24th.
so that intact. I thought
Intact.
that you were talking about
Okay,
changing.
No, all we changed is.
time out. I know we don't have Mr. Carmel here, but I do not think it's right for all 5 board members to take a vote on this recommendation.
I like that. I think we should just
want
leave it be.
with care. I think the discussion can inform our discussion tomorrow and our
I
vote
withdraw-
tomorrow.
I would agree with that.
I withdraw my motion.
What I would like to do, though, is make sure that the non-board member committee members get a chance, if there's anything else that you want to make sure that you get in for us to consider for the discussion tomorrow before we.
And you're also welcome to come and speak
Of
tomorrow.
course,
Also.
absolutely.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll take it. As a non-board member of the CCSD, I'd like to summarize what we talked about today in my own mind and make some recommendations. It seems to me that it's a pretty well agreed upon fact that Cambrians, the majority of Cambrians, the vast majority of Cambrians' main goal for living here is water security. Part of water security, most of it, is contained in these 3 infrastructures that we've been talking about: water, wastewater, and the supplemental water facility. We want to, these 3 things, increase and improve and maybe assure our water security, but they also help us avoid catastrophic failures that we've had some allusion to today. Second guessing, looking for blame, finding fault with previous boards, to me it doesn't seem very productive here. We can't dwell on the past, we need to move forward. The risk of not making improvements and the risk of not making a decision, those 2 things are very clear to me. And I can give you some examples. Los Osos in 1984 was told they had to have a new sewer system with the estimated cost of $24 million. They kicked the can down the road. They delayed it. They studied it. They had objections to it. They had weak boards who didn't decide on it. It is now costing them $150 million. And it's estimated that every household in Los Osos will be paying about $200 a month for the lack of courage that took from the first board to go ahead with it. I'll give you another one closer to home. If you've lived around here long enough, you know that Cambria alone spent millions of dollars on study after study after study about what to do. And the boards and the people in town didn't have the courage to take action. So I don't believe that delaying it any longer, going off into the woods about finding fault, looking for more information, more studies, more discussion, is very productive. It can be dangerous. We can get into this situation of analysis paralysis, as one of the public commenters today said so well. Adjustments can be made along the way after a decision is made, and rates can be adjusted, if necessary, downwards. We haven't even discussed fire today, which is one of the most important results of water security that we might gain from this improvement in our systems. As far as public trust is concerned, I know a lot of damage has been done. I don't think repeating those accusations ad infinitum and at every public meeting has helped our community, but I will say this. If we complete at least some of these improvements, even the first ones that the Infrastructure and Finance Committee have suggested, with the intelligent management of the funds, that the Finance Committee has suggested today, that this alone will assure the residents of the town that we're serious about keeping them informed and being transparent, and that should go a long way to restoring their confidence. So I hope that I have summarized the main points without getting too far into the weeds, and I know we have a big job in selling this thing to the community, but if we focus on the original idea that they want water security and we think we have a way to provide it, we can go a long way towards getting this done. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
I'll build on actually one of the points that Mike referred to. That is, I think listening today to the questions, all of the discussion, I don't think I heard anybody object to any one of the recommended CIP projects. And I don't think there's anybody in this room who thinks that we don't have a problem with deteriorating facilities. What I do think I've heard, more than I would like to, is a lack of trust and concerns about how things have been managed in the past. And so what I would say is that I don't see any reason that we shouldn't be in favor of raising the rates to accomplish what we've set out here to do. But I think it's incumbent on not only our committees and the CCSD staff to be clear in accounting for what gets done. And so I'll echo what Mike's been saying, that I think it's the missing ingredient. We all want fresh water. We all want a clean environment once we've disposed of the water that we've used. And I think these are well thought out projects that should take us where we need to go.
I move to adjourn, yeah.
I'll second that. I withdrew the motion.
We withdrew the
Because
motion.
we really shouldn't be making that decision today. We have to make the decision tomorrow.
Yeah, I would like to have a little short meeting of the Finance Committee.
Sure. Can we do that? A short follow-up
Why don't you
with
adjourn?
Finance?
Yeah,
Why don't you adjourn this joint meeting?
we did. I thought
Okay.
we did.
Okay,
She
we
had it
adjourned.
at the
Okay.
table, so I think we're adjourned. I just want to know, do you want to have another meeting before our next schedule?
Oh, no.
Our next scheduled
I
meeting.
used to teach English. I can read almost anybody's handwriting, even Jim's.
So our next meeting is
I'll scan it and send it to you.
in 4 weeks.